Darbar Sahib 84, where this whole kind of series is revolving around, is such an important moment. Everything we're talking about, this idea, this Padshahi, all of that is rejuvenated around Darbar Sahib.
ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਡਰਾ ਕੇ ਰਾਜ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਾਇਮ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ, ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਡਰਾਉਣਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ, ਪਰ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਤੋਂ ਡਰਨਾ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ। ਜਦੋਂ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਕੱਚੇ ਸੀਗੇ, ਸਿੱਖ ਪੱਕੇ ਸੀਗੇ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਕੋਲ ਇੰਨਾ ਮਟੀਰੀਅਲਿਜ਼ਮ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ। ਕਦੀ ਕੋਈ ਮੋਰਚਾ ਲੱਗਿਆ ਸੀ, ਹੁਣੇ ਛੱਡ ਕੇ ਚਲੋ ਜੀ, ਚਾਹੇ ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀਆਂ ਵੀ ਦੇਣੀਆਂ ਪੈਣ। ਇਫ ਆਲ ਦ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਫੋਰਗੇਟ ਇੰਡੀਆ, ਜੇ ਡਾਇਸਪੋਰਾ 'ਚ ਵੀ ਸਾਰੇ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਹੋ ਜਾਣ ਨਾ, ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਇਟਸ ਨਾਟ ਅ ਵੈਰੀ ਡਿਫਿਕਲਟ ਟਾਸਕ ਟੂ ਅਚੀਵ।
ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਦੇ ਅਧੀਨ ਨਹੀਂ ਰਹਿਣਾ, ਅਸੀਂ ਅਧੀਨਗੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਬੂਲ ਕਰਨੀ। The Khalsa's dawah has always been that we can do Raj better than you can do Raj. Khalsa de Raj ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ we can't even imagine somebody being hungry or sleeping on the streets. It's not a concept for us. It's very alien ਕਿ ਕੋਈ ਭੁੱਖਾ ਮਰੇ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਤਕਲੀਫ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ।
ਇਹ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦਾ ਸਿਧਾਂਤ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਡਿਸਕ੍ਰਿਮੀਨੇਟ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦੇ। ਭੁੱਖ ਤਾਂ ਸਭ ਨੂੰ ਲੱਗਦੀ, ਕੋਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਖਵਾ ਦਿਓ, ਕੋਈ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ, ਪਰ ਇਹ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਵਿਲੱਖਣ ਸਿਧਾਂਤ ਹੈ, ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਨੇ ਰਾਜ ਆਪਣੇ ਲਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਨਾ। is to restore harmony in this material world. All the materialistic powers, they will always have a conflict with you, whether it be Mughals, whether it be the Anglo rulers, whether it be the Indian rulers. ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸੱਚਾਈ ਤੇ ਬੁਰਾਈ ਦੀ ਲੜਾਈ ਹੈ, ਉਹ ਜੁਗਾਂ ਜੁਗਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਚੱਲਦੀ ਆ ਰਹੀ।
Colonization is the replacing of our memories with European memory. If our children can't imagine what Khalsa Raj would look like, then who's controlling our future? If you ask a bachcha Khalsa Raj kidda da hoga, and they say, yeah, like, it'll have McDonald's or it'll have like the best legal system in the world and everyone will be rich, then who's dictating their imagination? Who's controlling their imagination? ਜੇ ਭਾਈ ਤਾਰੂ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੇ ਧਰਮ ਕਮਾਇਆ, ਉਹੀ ਧਰਮ ਭਾਈ ਫੌਜਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੇ ਕਮਾਇਆ, ਉਹੀ ਧਰਮ ਜਸਵੰਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਖਾਲੜੇ ਨੇ ਕਮਾਇਆ, ਉਹੀ ਧਰਮ ਸੰਤ ਜੀ ਨੇ ਕਮਾਇਆ, right?
Following the Shahidiya is not just the spirit of the Sikh, it's also like the kirpa of the Shahidiya. We always see that is from Shahidiya, like Bhai Fauja Singh Ji said himself that like it's going to need not just prachar and stuff, but Shahidiya the Lord Paniya, and it's only when the earth is drenched with the bloods of the Shaheeds kirpa ho jata hundi hai.
The Shahidi, for other people it'll be like time of remorse, for Sikhi it's a time of celebration. So that's what annoys me a lot. In Gurdwara we talk all about history, so why don't we talk that freely about the Shaheeds of the recent Sangharsh? Uthe aake kaiyan da zuban band ho jandi hai, una da bhi reason same sega.
Panth has the power to determine which way it wants to go. We don't need to necessarily be put off anything either or be too fixated on anything. Panth has the ability to determine its future.
Welcome back to this special BOS TV podcast series. This is a 4-part series marking the 40 years since 1984, and we're blessed today to have 4 guests on the panel, and we're going to go through 4 different videos, 4 different podcasts discussing not just 1984 but the build-up and the aftermath of 1984 as well. So today on the panel we have Bhai Shamsher Singh Ji from Khalistan Centre.
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ।
We've got Bhai Baljit Singh Ji from NSYF.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
We've got Bhai Maniv Singh Ji, who is a part of the Save at GMP Godara Sahib in Coventry, and also part of Sikh Human Rights.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
And then finally we've got Bhai Manpreet Singh Ji from the Sikh World Parliament.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
If I'm correct, I got everyone's names correct and I got the organizations correct as well. So what we're going to be doing in today's podcast is we're going to be going through the background, the build-up towards 1984, looking at the foundations and the historic context. And then in the next podcast, we're going to talk about the build-up towards 1984, and the one after that is actual Saka 1984, speaking about the events that took place every single day in detail, and then finally the aftermath after June 1984. And then Guru Kirpa Karan, hopefully in the future, because it's not just 40 years marking June 1984, but also 40 years marking November 1984 as well. So hopefully later on Guru Sahib Ji Kirpa Karan, the Singhs have fought for great upper Allah to do then as well. So stay tuned for that. Where should we start then in terms of historical context, Siddhantic foundations? Where do we start this story of 1984 Ji? Who wants to go first?
I think if we start with why do we have any conflict with anyone? So if we ask Maharaj says, Hamra chagda raha na ko pandit mullah chhade those sabko meet hum apan kina hum sabna ke sajan. Sikh in principle don't have any dispute with anyone, in principle, because Maharaj says aval Allah noor paya kudrat ke sab bande ek noor te sab jag upja kaun phule ko bande. But then why do we have a conflict? I think Guru Granth Sahib Ji gives us an answer, because Maharaj Guru Nanak Sahib has actually built a Raj which was on the Neve of the truth. Nanak Raj chalaya, such quote Satani Neve da. Is such the Neve there. ਸੋ ਜਦੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੂੰ ਪੁੱਛੀਏ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਬਾਣੀ ਕਿੱਥੋਂ ਆਈ, ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਜੈਸੀ ਮੈਂ ਆਵੇ ਖਸਮ ਕੀ ਬਾਣੀ ਤੈਸੜਾ ਕਰੀ ਗਿਆਨ ਵੇ ਲਾ ਲਓ। ਬਟ ਅਗਲੀ ਸਤਰ 'ਚ ਹੀ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਉਸੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਇੱਕ ਟਾਇਰੈਂਟ ਹਿੰਦੁਸਤਾਨ ਉੱਤੇ ਚੜ੍ਹਾਈ ਕਰਕੇ ਆਇਆ ਹੋਇਆ, ਪੰਜਾਬ ਉੱਤੇ ਚੜ੍ਹਾਈ ਕਰਕੇ ਆਇਆ ਹੋਇਆ, ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਸੇਜ਼ ਅਗਲੀ ਸਤਰ 'ਚ ਹੀ ਪਾਪ ਕੀ ਜੰਜ ਲੈ ਕਾਬਲੋਂ ਤਾਇਆ ਜੋਰੀ ਮੰਗੇ ਦਾਨ ਵੇ ਲਾ ਲਓ। ਇਹ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਮੀਰੀ ਪੀਰੀ ਦਾ ਇੱਕ ਸੁਮੇਲ ਹੈ, ਯੂ ਨੋ it's inseparable. You can't just buy half of the package and leave the other half. ਸੋ ਜੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਅੰਦਰ ਗੁਰਬਾਣੀ ਜਾਊਗੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਮੇਂ ਦਾ ਸੱਚ ਸਮੇਂ ਸਿਰ ਬੋਲੋਗੇ ਐਂਡ ਦੈਟ ਵਿਲ ਹੈਵ ਰੈਪਰਕਸ਼ਨਸ। ਹੁਣ ਗੁਰੂ ਅਰਜਨ ਦੇਵ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹ ਦੀ ਜੇ ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ, ਜਿਹੜੀ ਪਹਿਲੀ ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀ ਜੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਿੱਖ ਕੌਮ 'ਚ ਕਹੀਏ, ਤੇ ਉਹ ਕਿਉਂ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ? ਅਸਲ ਉਹਦਾ ਕਾਰਨ ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਫਤਵੇ ਨੂੰ ਪੜ੍ਹੋ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਫਤਵਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀ ਲਈ ਆਇਆ ਸੀ, ਉਸ ਫਤਵੇ ਦਾ ਕਾਰਨ ਇਹ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਇਸ ਸ਼ਖਸ ਦੇ ਵਿਚਾਰ ਤੋਂ ਸਾਡੀ ਰਾਜਸੀ ਪ੍ਰਭੂ ਸੱਤਾ ਨੂੰ ਖਤਰਾ ਹੈ, ਸਾਡੀ ਤਾਕਤ ਨੂੰ ਖਤਰਾ ਹੈ। ਔਰ ਉਹ ਖਤਰਾ ਕਿਹਦੇ ਤੋਂ ਸੀ? ਉਹ ਖਤਰਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਆਦ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਦੀ ਰਚਨਾ ਤੋਂ, ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੁਰੂ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜੀ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਜਦੋਂ ਕੰਪਾਈਲ ਕਰ ਦਿੰਦੇ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹ ਸੱਚਾਈ ਲਿਖੀ ਹੈ। ਜੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੁਰੂ ਗੋਬਿੰਦ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਦੇ ਕੰਟੈਕਸਟ ਤੋਂ ਵੀ ਦੇਖੀਏ ਤੇ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੂੰ ਜਦੋਂ ਪੁੱਛਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਕੀ ਹੈ, ਤੇ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਇਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਕਿ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੀ ਫੌਜ ਹੈ, ਖਾਲਸਾ ਅਕਾਲ ਪੁਰਖ ਦੀ ਫੌਜ। ਹੁਣ ਫੌਜ ਦਾ ਇੱਕ ਕੰਮ ਹੁੰਦਾ, ਫੌਜ ਦਾ ਕੰਮ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਕਿ ਜਿਹਦੇ ਲਈ ਉਹ ਲੜਦੇ ਨੇ ਉਹਦਾ ਰਾਜ ਰਿਸਟੋਰ ਕਰਨਾ, ਉਹਦੇ ਰਾਜ ਨੂੰ ਸਥਾਪਿਤ ਕਰਨਾ, ਇਸਟੈਬਲਿਸ਼ ਕਰਨਾ। ਅਤੇ ਅਕਾਲ ਪੁਰਖ ਦਾ ਰਾਜ ਕੀ ਹੈ? ਅਗੇਨ ਗੁਰੂ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜੀ ਨੂੰ ਪੁੱਛੀਏ ਤੇ ਸਭ ਸੁਖਾਲੀ ਬੁੱਠੀਆਂ ਹੈ ਹੋਆ ਹਲੀਮੀ ਰਾਜ ਜੀਓ। ਅਤੇ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਦਾ ਅਸੂਲ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਤੋਂ ਇਹ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਕੋਈ ਟਾਇਰਨੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ, ਯੂ ਨੋ ਐਨੀਵੇਅਰ ਵੇਅਰ ਦੇਅਰ ਇਜ਼ ਇਨਜਸਟਿਸ, ਜਦੋਂ ਕੋਈ ਇੱਕ ਦੂਜੇ ਨੂੰ ਦਬਾਉਣ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰ ਰਿਹਾ, ਅਤੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਸਿੱਖ ਦੇ ਸਟੈਪ ਇਨ। ਉਹ ਸੱਚ ਬੋਲਣ ਤੋਂ ਗੁਰੇਜ਼ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦੇ, ਉਹ ਸੱਚ ਦੀ ਲੜਾਈ ਲੜਨ ਤੋਂ ਗੁਰੇਜ਼ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦੇ, ਚਾਹੇ ਉਹਦੀ ਕੋਈ ਵੀ ਕੀਮਤ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਚੁਕਾਉਣੀ ਪਵੇ। ਚਾਹੇ ਉਹ ਮੁਗਲ ਸਿੱਖ ਕਨਫਲਿਕਟ ਲੈ ਲਓ, ਚਾਹੇ ਐਂਗਲੋ ਸਿੱਖ ਕਨਫਲਿਕਟ ਲੈ ਲਓ, ਅਤੇ ਚਾਹੇ ਹੁਣ ਇੰਡੋ ਸਿੱਖ ਕਨਫਲਿਕਟ ਲੈ ਲਓ। ਐਵਰੀਵੇਅਰ ਦ ਐਸੈਂਸ ਇਜ਼ ਦ ਸੇਮ। ਅਸੀਂ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਟਾਇਰੈਂਟ ਹੈ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਕਹਿ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਤੈਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਕੰਮ ਜ਼ੁਲਮ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਨ ਦੇਣਾ, ਚਾਹੇ ਤੂੰ ਜਿੱਧਰੋਂ ਮਰਜ਼ੀ ਆ ਰਿਹਾ, ਚਾਹੇ ਤੂੰ ਕੋਈ ਵੀ ਹੈ, ਚਾਹੇ ਉਹ ਸਾਡੇ ਹੀ ਭੇਸਟ ਕਿਉਂ ਨਾ ਹੋਵੇ, ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਤੂੰ ਇਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰ ਸਕਦਾ। ਇਹ ਅਕਾਲ ਪੁਰਖ ਦੇ ਰਾਜ ਦੇ ਅਸੂਲਾਂ ਦੇ ਉਲਟ ਹੈ, ਇਹ ਅਕਾਲ ਪੁਰਖ ਦੀ ਰਜ਼ਾ ਦੇ ਉਲਟ ਹੈ। ਔਰ ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੇਖੋਗੇ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਅਸੀਂ ਅੱਜ ਟੌਪਿਕ ਡਿਸਕਸ ਕਰਨਾ ਹੈ, there are a lot of dimensions to it. There are personalities, very strong personalities. There is a territorial conflict, which is Punjab and India conflict. ਠੀਕ ਹੈ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਆਪਣੀ ਇੱਕ ਕਿੰਗਡਮ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ। And there is a conflict of civilization. And I would like to say that the whole war is about a war of civilization, because ਇੱਕ civilization ਹੈ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕਹਿੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਾਰਟਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੰਡ ਕੇ ਇੱਕ ਦੀ ਸੁਪਰਮੈਸੀ ਦੂਜੇ 'ਤੇ ਸਥਾਪਿਤ ਕਰਨੀ ਹੈ। ਠੀਕ ਹੈ ਨਾ, ਵਰਨ ਵੰਡ ਜਿਹਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਬਟ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਵਾਸ ਟੋਟਲੀ ਅਗੇਂਸਟ ਇਟ। ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਸੇਜ਼ ਖੱਤਰੀ ਬ੍ਰਾਹਮਣ ਸ਼ੂਦਰ ਵੈਸ਼ ਉਪਦੇਸ਼ ਚੌਵਰ ਨਾ ਕੋ ਸਾਂਝਾ। ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੇ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਉਪਦੇਸ਼ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤਾ। ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਿਵਲਾਈਜੇਸ਼ਨ ਹੈ, ਉਸ ਸਿਵਲਾਈਜੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਨੀਵੀਂ ਜਾਤ ਦਾ ਬੰਦਾ ਭਗਤੀ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰ ਸਕਦਾ, ਉਹਦਾ ਸਿਰ ਵੱਢਿਆ ਗਿਆ। ਐਂਡ that too from Lord Ram, you know, as they say it. ਇੱਕ ਰਿਸ਼ੀ ਸ਼ੰਭੂਕ ਸੀਗਾ, ਉਹ ਭਗਤੀ ਕਰ ਰਿਹਾ ਸੀ, ਨੀਵੀਂ ਜਾਤ ਦਾ ਸੀ, ਉਹਦੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਦਾ ਸਿਰ ਵੱਢ ਦਿਓ, ਉਹਨੇ ਵੱਢ ਦਿੱਤਾ। ਬਟ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਵਾਜ਼ ਟੋਟਲੀ ਅਗੇਂਸਟ ਆਲ ਦਿਸ। ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਸਭ ਸੁਖਾਲੀ ਉੱਠੀਆਂ, ਇਹ ਰਾਜ ਹੋਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ, ਇਹ ਅਵਲ ਅੱਲਾ ਨੂਰ ਪਾਇਆ, ਕੁਦਰਤ ਕੇ ਸਭ ਬੰਦੇ, ਇਹ ਸਾਰੇ ਇੱਕੋ ਨੇ, ਇਹ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਰਾਈਟਸ ਮਿਲਣੇ ਚਾਹੀਦੇ ਨੇ। ਡਿਸਪੈਰਿਟੀ ਬਿਟਵੀਨ ਦ ਹੈਵਸ ਐਂਡ ਦ ਹੈਵ ਨੋਟਸ ਘਟਣੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਹੈ। ਕਿਸੇ ਇੱਕ ਦਾ ਦੂਜੇ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਅਧਿਕਾਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ, ਸਭ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਣੀ ਆਪਣੀ ਫਰੀਡਮ ਹੋਣੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਹੈ। ਬਟ ਇੱਕ ਚੀਜ਼ ਹੈ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਡਿਸਟਰਬ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਣੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ, ਉਹ ਹੈਗਾ ਪਰਮਾਤਮਾ ਦਾ ਰਾਜ, ਹਲੇਮੀ ਰਾਜ, ਉਹ ਡਿਸਟਰਬ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ। ਔਰ ਸਾਰਾ ਕਨਫਲਿਕਟ ਜਦੋਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਹਿਸਟਰੀ 'ਚ ਡਵੈਲ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਹੌਲੀ ਹੌਲੀ, people will realize ਕਿ this is all about righteousness, all about ਧਰਮ। it's not a must be ਲੜਾਈ, it's about the ਧਰਮ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਧਰਮ ਪਰਮਾਤਮਾ ਨੇ ਸਥਾਪਿਤ ਕੀਤਾ ਦੁਨੀਆ 'ਚ, ਉਹਨੂੰ ਖਾਲਸੇ ਨੇ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਰੀਸਟੋਰ ਕਰਨਾ। it's all about that.
Bhai Sabji's touched upon, I guess, going right back to 1469 and see Guru Nanak Dev Ji doing it. Add anything to that? I appreciate there's a lot to cover, many years, but anything else before we come into the 1900s?
I think sometimes we think about, like, we're going to be talking about Raj, and then Raj, like the Ichha for Raj, and then Guru Nanak Dev Ji seems to be like distangled, right, in the Sikh masses, but it's absolutely not. Sri Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj comes to this world, and they travel. We know they do the Char Udasiyan, and there's no kind of distinction made here. Gad Baghdad Nivaya ke Makkah Medina sabbe Nivaya. Everybody talks to Guru Nanak Dev Ji. Guru Nanak Dev Ji is the supreme Khud Khuda, Hana Guru Nanak Sahib Ji. At that time, it's important how the Sikhs evolved from Guru Nanak Dev Ji's time onwards, but it's also important to know how the Mughals, how the powers that be at that time, saw the Sikhs evolving. They consider Guru Nanak Dev Ji a Fakir at the time, somewhat of renunciate, Bhagat, a Fakir. In their writings, they consider Guru Nanak Dev Ji Fakir. Then after this, we know the challenge Babbar. We go to Guru Angad Dev Ji Maharaj's time. Guru Angad Dev Ji creates a settlement at Khadur Sahib. Guru Amar Das Ji Maharaj creates a settlement at Goindwal Sahib. So by Goindwal Sahib, now we've got multiple, Kartarpur Sahib, Goindwal Sahib, we've got multiple Sikh settlements happening by the time of Guru Amar Das Ji. Akbar is on the throne. Akbar is a liberal. He's quite a liberal guy in terms of religion. And he of course comes and sees Guru Amar Das Ji Maharaj. So even from there, Akbar in kind of was very happy to see Guru Amar Das Ji Maharaj, and they gift him a series of villages, one of which later becomes Chak Guru Ka Amritsar Sahib. So by Guru Ram Das Ji's time now, we have even more settlements, right? And we have other religions bowing to Sikhi. We have the personalities like Mian Mir who are accepting that Guru Ram Das Ji is the way to God, which alone has its own conflicts. And by the time we come to Guru Arjan Dev Ji, things get even more kind of conflicted for the powers that be, because they could even share Karan Dasega for the Shahidi of Guru Arjan Dev Ji, a few of which I think have been covered in great detail, whether that's the insertion of militant Islam, the insertion of this idea that you've got to put Gurbani, you've got to put Quranic verses in Guru Granth Sahib Ji, the idea of personalities like Chandu, trying to oppress and trying to control the Guru. But what's important is Guru Arjan Dev Ji, and according to I think it's Tuzake Jahangiri, his own word, he says Jiddan Bhai Sahib Ji ne kiya the growth of Sikhi is a problem for him alone. So there's people in his ear, there's Sakhi server in his ear, famously Guru Sahib Ji towards by Manch from the Sakhi service. There in his ear, the militant Islam is in Maharaj's ear, in Sheikh Farid Bukhari is in Maharaj's ear. All of these personalities are trying to convince Guru Sahib Ji, trying to convince Jahangir that we do this with Guru Sahib. But Jahangir's own words suggest that the growth of Sikhi is a problem to me. Why is it a problem? By the time we come to Guru Arjan Dev Ji, this is no longer a fakir, a sadhu, a renunciate, a saint. This is Sache Padshah. Sikhs are actively calling Guru Arjan Dev Ji Sache Padshah. There's a famous story, I think, referenced in Guru Pratap Suraj, where a poor Sikh, because he thought it by accident, he thought it was Guru Sahib Ji's darbar and it was actually Jahangir's. And he said, ki Maharaj mere lok par lok di rakhyo, this world and the next. And then Jahangir was like, well, this is some sort of mad request. I can help you here. The next life, and he picked his tukra up, like his little piece of like wood and something. It's a worthless thing. He picked it back up and think, oh no, that's fine. I've come to the wrong place. And it's these kind of elements that are really angering the state, that Guru Arjan Dev Ji Padshah is the Sache Padshah. And so already there is this Siddhantic ladai of insertion of where the Mughals want to dominate, but the Guru Kar is growing. And then of course, which we're going to touch into, I'm sure in much detail, is the militarization of the Sikhs. And by Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji's time, it's full of vanguard. They are challenging the state. Bajan karke ladai hui Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji di. For Baj, ki the Baj comes and Guru Sahib Ji jo saranaave tis kantlave. We'll keep it. It doesn't belong to you, it belongs to us. But
Baj Saki, go into a bit more detail on that, because that's a really important conflict, right? Because that's not over anything that on a dunyavi level people would understand today. Also maybe can this ke Baj more do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It seemed like the logical thing to do, but Guru Sahib Ji had it already. When Guru Sahib Ji Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji gets the Guru Gaddi, Buddha Ji puts on the Miri Biri and the Ankarpanna, and then already we're challenging the state. The Tadis called at the time Doha Karpana Baddiya, ek Miri di, ek Piri di, ek Raj di, ek Azmat di, ek Rakhi kare Wazir di, Pag teri ki Jahangir di. That where's your stature compared to the lowly stature of Jahangir? So Jahangir, the challenge to Jahangir is already there, Tika, and it's important actually because I think there's again Sikh masses is what we're trying to aim this at. Is there's this little bit of a kind of discomfort at like the militarization of Sikhi, and I think Bhai Gurdas Ji's Wara, Bhai Gurdas Ji goes into actually vivid details of what the Sikhs were feeling at the time, and it's quite interesting read. This is from the opinion of Sikhs. Give you this, the Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji is the Guru Gaddi. Now they're taking this in a slightly different direction. What's going on? And kai Sikhan जिन्हां विच नहीं शरदा सी, they were quite kind of perplexed by this kind of new notion of what religion is, what dharma is. Bhai Gurdas Ji writes, "Dharmasal kar bahida ek thauna tika tikaya." The other gurus o dharmshala vich bende si. They'd stay in a spiritual place and uthon ho bani likhde si, ਉਹ ਸਿੱਖਿਆ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਸੀ, but this guru ਇੱਕ ਥਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਟਿਕਿਆ ਟਿਕਾਇਆ ਇੱਕ ਥਾਂ ਤੇ ਟਿਕ ਕੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਬੰਦਾ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹ ਘਰ ਆਵਦੇ. Bhai Gurdas Ji talks about that the other padshahs, the emperors would come to us, referencing Akbar, yeah, but this guru is a little bit more different. Padshah kar aavde gad chadiya padshah chadaya. He's fortified himself to challenge the emperor. I know.
But even that was a hukam from Guru Arjan Dev Sahib as well, wasn't it? It wasn't like Guru Hargobind Sahib went a different direction.
Absolutely, no, it was all preordained.
Tell my son to like sit on the
Takhat. Absolutely, and even park we can, without going too much in, but like even whenever the Guru Gaddis changed, there's been a park, a test. Now the test is for us to have a look to understand that this is divine. And whether that's by Lena Ji, the Sakhi, we know about Tanak Rup Rahakartar, Guru Nanak Dev Ji giving the Guru Gaddi onwards, there's always been a park, and there's a park here in the Shahidi of Guru Arjan Dev Ji to understand how will Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji take it. So by the time we come into Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji's time, it's a fully militarized force. And fir baach janga judanast sama aa janda hai. So again, this is inseparable from the religious Siddhant, and it's important to understand that Fakir, Guru Nanak, this is how they saw कि फकीरी दा लिबास सी, फकीरी दा जितना सारे पासे जाके उदासियां प्रचार करना, hey, this is different, सच्चे पातशाह. And then Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji dal panjan Guru Surma, है ना? So already the direction of Sikhi is moving towards loggerheads with the states.
I love how you join the parallels between the Guru's era and then even what we're going to be discussing in the next few podcasts. And just a question for you guys. You spoke about the first 5 Gurus and then Shevet Pasha Ji, and you kind of touched upon Guru Arjan Dev Ji. When people say that, the first 5 Gurus were, all spiritual and peaceful, and the next 5, they're a bit more extreme, what would you guys say to that? You kind of answered a bit of it anyway.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like we mentioned, from a Shastra level, Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj would carry a stick, Asa Hat Kitab Kach, right, famously by Gurdas Ji. We know of Baba Buddha Ji's role across the first 5 Gurus. Unhone bhi wahi sikhi dikhi from the first 5 Gurus, and then they're the person that later Babbar Sahib teaches effectively a younger Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji is their ustad. No one could teach the Guru, but they're given that responsibility to tell Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji how the previous 5 Gurus lived. Malakhara Sahib from the time of Guru Angad Dev Ji Maharaj. So this is already making an entrance. Some may say there's chapters, I think. I think we're going to probably go into, there's chapters in Sikh history, and that's already alluding to the next chapter from the first 5 Gurus.
I think just to summarize and add on to that, what Bhaji is saying is that over that 239-year period, Guru Kal, Guru Sahib solidifies all of the institutions, everything that the Panth would need to flourish and live their Sikhi autonomously. So jide Shair Vasaya, like Shastar Vidya Ditya Panthanu, everything that we needed is to put this Siddhant of Miri Piri into practice, because the Gurmukh is the one that puts those teachings into practice. Khalsa Soe Malesh Se Chare, to go fight anybody that's trying to dominate anybody else, any aspect of nature that tries to dominate any other aspect of Akal Purkhs Kayanat, like everything according to the Sikh worldview, jo disse so appe hi aap, ye sara kuch Paramatma da roop hai. And this is where the Khalsa comes in to exert the authority of Akal Purkh, because they've been bestowed Patshahi by Guru Sahib. One aspect of creation that tries to dominate another aspect of creation out of homme, out of hankar, odi homme pannan da farj banda Khalsa da. In every era you see Sikhs putting those teachings into practice. You know, and there's many Sakhiyan, like one of them, like by Dallaji Sakhi, that where it teaches you that Guru Sahib values that quality of Suram Gati. You know, marjivre hona, surme hona is not just the bhakti aspect. Both of these things were completely intangible. And Guru Sahib, like, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਚੀਜ਼ ਪਿਆਰੀ ਲੱਗਦੀ ਆ ਕਿ ਸਿੱਖ ਦਲੇਰ ਹੋਵੇ and shows that ਇੱਛਾ ਕਿ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਮਰਨ ਦਾ ਕੋਈ ਭੈ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ, ਜਿਸ ਮਰਨੇ ਸੇ ਜਗ ਡਰੇ ਮੇਰੇ ਮਨ ਆਨੰਦ. So as we want to become tyagi of any worldly attachment, but for a purpose, not just for our own spiritual fulfillment, where, like, you know, today's, you know, you could argue in many aspects, Sikhi has become like any other religion where it's about personal peace, right? I've worked really hard at, like, you know, and I've come to the Guru's Darbar for a bit of peace and inner harmony. But that peace and inner harmony was cultivated, that tyag puna was cultivated, कि तुसी अपनी जान निशावर कर सकन. You could sacrifice everything for the ultimate path of Dharam. Like, and that was what earning Dharam was always about, right? Like, je Bhai Taru Singh ne Dharam kamaya, ohi Dharam, you know, Bhai Fauja Singh ne kamaya, ohi Dharam, Jaswant Singh Khalre ne kamaya, ohi Dharam Sant Ji ne kamaya, right? It's always been the exact same thing. So when you see Darbar Sahib being invaded like 8 times throughout its inception, Akaal Takhat's Sirjana is again an open challenge कि असी पूजा अकाल दी करते हैं, असी कोई दुनियावी सता, like we don't want to live under the authority or the Raj of any other worldly power. Rajan ke Raja, Maharajan ke Maharaja, ऐसो Raj छोड़ और दूसर कौन त्याई है. Like, our Raj comes from Akal Purkh, right? असी Patshahi dawa jiri Akal Purkh ne sanu bakshiya hai, that's what we want to live in. And we want to respect the sovereignty of Akal Purkh alone, no other. And that is the crux of the conflict. कि असी किसी दे अधीन नहीं रहना, असी अधीनगी नहीं कबूल करनी. Our claim, our dawa is greater than any other dunyavi dawa. The Khalsa's dawa has always been that we can do Raj better than you can do Raj. You know, one example that I've used like for many years is like in England where we're living, TV Raj ya kise da, right? Khalsa da Raj thoro, like, you know, and it can never be, no matter how successful we claim to be on a dunyavi level. Jehड़ा Raja Rani ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਰਾਜ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਲੋਕੀ ਭੁੱਖੇ ਮਰਦੇ ਆ, ਲੋਕੀ ਸੜਕਾਂ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਸੌਂਦੇ ਆ, right? Khalsa ਦੇ ਰਾਜ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ we can't even imagine somebody being hungry or sleeping on the streets because it's not a concept for us. It's very alien ਕਿ ਕੋਈ ਭੁੱਖਾ ਮਰੇ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਤਕਲੀਫ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ. Like even in the Kasani Morcha recently, ਉੱਥੇ you know ਆਪਣੇ ਹੱਕਾਂ ਲਈ ਲੈਣ ਗਈ ਸੀ, ਉੱਥੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਦਿੱਲੀ ਨੂੰ ਲੰਗਰ ਛਕ ਕੇ ਆ ਗਏ, right? Like it's a very foreign idea for us ਕਿ ਕੋਈ ਤਰਫੇ ਕੋਈ ਬੱਚਾ ਭੁੱਖਾ ਮਰੇ. I remember seeing videos at the time with little kids from Delhi who were just like, they didn't care about the Kasani Sangharsh. They were happy that they were getting food for the first time and they were being fed and they were treated like human beings, and they were like, you know,
the capital of India.
Yeah, capital of India, yeah. And they were asking them, the Hindu reporter, like, you know, what's going on here, like, you know, because they were like all happy and smiling, and they're like, oh, we're being fed, like, and she's like, who's feeding you? And they're like, Sardar. And like this was like that relationship has always been like that. Sadi Sardari is based on this gun of halimi, and halimi means mulami, it means nimrata, it means kindness, humbleness, meekness. That's the quality of our Raj, not, you know, ketusi, you know, Rajenu Bangaria, you know, we're going to cut you apart, we're going to do this, we're going to brutalize you, we're going to torture you to death. That's never been the quality of our Raj. So even like in the Sakhi of like Ranjit Singh's time, he used to like, you know, put on clothes of a garib and go out and like, you know, when people are hungry would like give them food from the, you know, the Lahore Darbars, like, you know, stores and stuff. But that's always been the root of the conflict, that we don't want to live under the rule of any other power, no matter what they are. Sada dawa ona to vadaya, asi Akaal di puja karni, and all of that you can see from our Bol Balle, which is another important source of how we live and what we're striving for. And one of the most common Bol Balle, deg deg fateh bred ki pej pant ki jeet. and all ਉਹ ਸਾਰਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਰਾਜ਼ ਆ, like the formula, the secret, it's all in there. Deg Teg Fateh, like Deg Teg can't be exist under any other authority. ਉਹ ਅਕਾਲ ਪੁਰਖ ਦੇ ਹੁਕਮਾਂ ਅਨਸਾਰ Deg ta Teg jag mein do chale, right? They exist because of Akal Purkh's hukum, and they're created because of our world view. There's no concept like a Deg in the world. There's no concept like Sarb Sanji Walta, Sarbat de Pale da Raj kaim karna, where the purpose of the Raj is ke ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦਾ ਭਲਾ ਹੋਵੇ. ਉਹ ਸਾਰੇ ਦਾਵਾ ਤਾਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ, but we can see in this country alone, we don't need to look further or to even like the Mughals from the 18th century. You can look here, this is a Raj, ਇਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹ ਸਰਬੱਤ ਦਾ ਭਲਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦੇ. I mean, ਇਹ ਤਾਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਅੰਗਰੇਜ਼ ਦੇ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਦਾ, like, I was reading like child poverty index in like Gora towns, where you got like kids like starving, man. You got like old people that have lived their whole lives, worked jobs, and like, they're choosing every winter between like eating or like heating their homes and stuff, because this system isn't designed to do the pala of lokai, but our system is, and that always brings us continuously into conflict. Jera vi ਸਾਡੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਛਿੱਤਰ ਰੱਖ ਕੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ wants to make us live under their system. And I say ਛਿੱਤਰ ਰੱਖ ਕੇ because really it is, because if you challenge it, you're going to meet, as Santi would say, ਬੰਦ ਕੱਟੇ ਜਾਓਗੇ, like ਖੋਪਰੀਆਂ ਲਿਥੂਗੀਆਂ if you want to challenge it. ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਚੱਪਲੀਆਂ ਝਾੜ ਕੇ ਤੁਰੇ ਫਿਰਨਾ, ਫਿਰ ਸਿਰ ਮੂੰਹ ਬਣਾ ਕੇ ਤੁਰੇ ਫਿਰਨਾ, ਕਿਸੇ ਨੇ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਕੁਛ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਹਿਣਾ. That's the reality. But Sikhs are always going to come into conflict because of those reasons. Because
the crux of that conflict as well is that the other powers, they recognize the Vatapuna, obviously the Khalsa Raj, and that's why it'll always be a threat. Even during the Guru's times, the Mughal Sarkar and the empire, like it took, I mean, think of the size of it at that time and the number of Sikh, it didn't really pose a military kind of risk or a challenge to the Mughals, but it was the ideological thing that this Raj is better. And that's the issue, that the Akal Takht will always, when we operate as Sikhs, as the Guru intended, we will always be like an eyesore in it. The Akal Takht will always kind of be seen as a challenge. And that's why successive regimes, whether it's the Indian, whether it's the British or the Mughals or the Afghans, they'll always target Sri Akal Takht Sahib.
Yeah, and that Halimi worldview, it emanates from Darbar Sahib, it emanates from Akal Takht. These are spaces where we gather, we live our Sikhi autonomously, we make decisions. Akal da Takht, not kise dunyavi Takht, right? And all Aram Gariya Bunge, all the fortifications, educational systems, everything that comes together, all of the social institutions, whether it's Langar, our schooling system, our Nishan Sahib, our Shastar, it's all part of manifesting our Padshahi. Like as Shastranu sade ye Gurpir hai hamare, right? Like the Shastra is an integral aspect to us. It's not a symbol, but it is a Shastra, and it represents something which is Guru Sahib's hukam, Guru Sahib's adesh, ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸੱਚ ਦਾ ਰਾਜ ਕਰਨਾ. And ਜਿੱਥੇ ਵੀ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੀਚੇ ਅੰਦਰ ਨੀਚ ਜਾਤ, wherever there's a marginalized group, where somebody ਜਿੱਥੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਦੱਬਿਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਝ ਵਾਰ ਦੇਣਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਰਾਖੀ ਵਾਸਤੇ. We don't capture Raj for the sake of being Raje. We capture Raj ਕਿ ਸਰਬੱਤ ਦਾ ਭਲਾ ਹੋਵੇ.
I think that's a very important aspect. A lot of people ask us, like, why do you want Khalistan? Is it territory? Is it your control? Is it your religion? Why do you want it? And I always say this, ki Guru Sahib and Gurbani, as long as my ego is concerned or your ego is concerned, Guru Sahib tells us, Raj na chahu mukt na chahu Manpreet charan kamlare. But when it comes to tyranny, then Guru Sahib says, Raj karega Khalsa aaki rahe na koi. This difference is very important. I think we have kind of failed to put this narrative out कि सिक्खां ने राज अपने लिए नहीं करना, is to restore harmony, is to restore Maharaj, is to restore Vaheguru's law, in this material world. And as Bhai Shamsher Singh Ji said, all the materialistic powers who are craving for materialism, they will always have a conflict with you, whether it be Mughals, whether it be the Anglo rulers, whether it be the Indian rulers now. So this conflict is eternal. ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸੱਚਾਈ ਤੇ ਬੁਰਾਈ ਦੀ ਲੜਾਈ ਹੈ, ਉਹ ਜੁਗਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਚੱਲਦੀ ਆ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਨਾ, ਔਰ ਇਹ ਚੱਲਦੀ ਰਹਿਣੀ ਹੈ. ਤੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੀ ਝੋਲੀ ਪਰ ਇਹ ਦਾਤ ਪਾਈ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪਰਵਾਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਕੇਰੀ ਬਾਜ ਸੱਚੇ ਨਾ, ਕਿ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹ ਦੇ ਹੱਕ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਆਣੀ ਹੈ, ਜਿਸ ਦਾ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਕਾਵਣਾ ਤਿਸ ਕਈ ਐਸਾ ਵਾਸ, ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹ ਤੋਂ ਮੁਨਕਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੇ. ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੀ ਕੋਰਟ 'ਚ ਸਾਏ ਭਾਵੇਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਫਾਂਸੀ ਲੱਗ ਜਾਏ, ਭਾਵੇਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਗੋਲੀਆਂ ਨਾਲ ਭੁੰਨ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਜਾਏ, ਡਜ਼ ਨਾਟ ਮੈਟਰ. ਅਸੀਂ ਸਾਡੀ ਟੇਕ ਉਸ ਪਰਮਾਤਮਾ 'ਤੇ ਹੈ ਜਿਹਨੇ ਇਨਸਾਫ ਕਰਨਾ ਐਟ ਦੀ ਐਂਡ। ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਦੇ ਤੋਂ ਮੁਨਕਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੇ, ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਦੇ ਅਗੇਂਸਟ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਾ ਸਕਦੇ। ਐਂਡ ਜਸਟ ਵਨ ਥਿੰਗ ਆਈ ਥਿੰਕ ਵੀਵ ਕਾਈਂਡ ਆਫ ਮਿਸਡ ਇਜ਼ ਕਿ ਗੁਰੂ ਨਾਨਕ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਤੋਂ ਜੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਰਿਬੇਲੀਅਸ ਨੇਚਰ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦਾ ਦੇਖਣਾ, ਉਹ ਕਿੱਧਰੋਂ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਹੋਇਆ? ਤੇ ਦੈਟਸ ਫਰੋਮ ਦ ਗੁਰੂ ਨਾਨਕ ਇਟਸੈਲਫ। ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ, ਨਾਟ ਮੈਨੀ ਪੀਪਲ ਨੋ, ਪਰ ਬਾਬਰ ਦੀ ਜੇਲ੍ਹ ਕੱਟੀ, ਠੀਕ ਹੈ ਨਾ। ਐਂਡ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਰਿਲੀਜੀਅਸ ਐਪੀਸੈਂਟਰ ਸੀਗੇ, ਉੱਥੇ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੰਗਾਰਿਆ ਗਿਆਨ ਦੀ ਖੜਕ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਕਿ ਜੋ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ ਇਹ ਕੁਛ ਵੀ ਹੋਰ ਹੋ ਸਕਦਾ, ਮੈਨੂੰ ਧਰਮ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੱਗ ਰਿਹਾ। ਕਿਉਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੀ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ ਖਰਾਬ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੋ? ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਆਜ਼ ਇਜ਼ ਡਿਫਰੈਂਟ। ਅਸੀਂ ਫਿਰ ਵੀ ਮਟੀਰੀਅਲਿਜ਼ਮ 'ਚ ਜੀਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਅਸੀਂ ਜਦੋਂ ਕੋਈ ਆਪਣੇ ਤੋਂ ਵਰਗਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਦੇਖਦੇ, ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਦੇ 'ਤੇ ਥੋੜ੍ਹਾ ਗੁੱਸੇ 'ਚ ਆ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਉਹ ਇੰਨੇ ਵਾਲ ਕਾਤੇ ਕੱਟੇ ਨੇ, ਮੋਨਾ ਕਿਉਂ ਹੈ ਨਾ। ਬਟ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੈਵਰ ਯੂਜ਼ ਟੂ ਥਿੰਕ ਲਾਈਕ ਦੈਟ। ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਯੂਜ਼ ਟੂ ਆਲਵੇਜ਼ ਹੈਵ ਦ ਤਰਸ ਦੀ ਨਿਗਾਹ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਬੰਦਾ ਆਪਣਾ ਜੀਵਨ ਗਵਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈ ਨਾ। ਭਾਈ ਪ੍ਰਾਪਤ ਮਾਨੁਕ ਦੇ ਹੋਰੀਆ, ਗੋਬਿੰਦ ਮਿਲਣ ਕੀ ਤੇਰੀ ਬਰੀਆ। ਇਹ ਇੱਕ ਗੋਲਡਨ ਚਾਂਸ ਹੈ ਪਰਮਾਤਮਾ ਨੂੰ ਮਿਲਣ ਦਾ, ਅਤੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਕਰਮਾਂ ਕਰਕੇ ਜਾਂ ਆਪਣੀ ਗਲਤ ਆਈਡੀਓਲੋਜੀ ਕਰਕੇ ਇਹਨੇ ਗਵਾ ਲੈਣਾ। ਸੋ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਯੂਜ਼ ਟੂ ਟੋਕ ਫਰੋਮ ਦੈਟ ਪਰਸਪੈਕਟਿਵ। ਚਾਹੇ ਉਹ ਕੁਰੂਕਸ਼ੇਤਰ 'ਚ ਗਏ ਹੋਣ, ਚਾਹੇ ਹਰੀਦੁਆਰ ਗਏ ਹੋਣ, ਚਾਹੇ ਮੱਕਾ ਗਏ ਹੋਣ, ਚਾਹੇ ਕਿਤੇ ਵੀ ਗਏ ਹੋਣ, ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੈਵਰ ਯੂਜ਼ ਟੂ, ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਦੀ ਨਿਗਾਹ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਡਿਫਰੈਂਸੀਏਸ਼ਨ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਮੇਰਾ ਆਪਣਾ ਅਤੇ ਇਹ ਮੇਰਾ ਪਰਾਇਆ। ਅਤੇ ਸੇਮ ਹੀ ਸਿੱਖ ਦੀ ਨਿਗਾਹ 'ਚ ਹੈ। ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਛੋਟੀ ਜਿਹੀ ਐਗਜ਼ਾਮਪਲ ਦੇ ਦੇਣਾ, ਇਸ ਸਲਾਈਟਲੀ ਆਫ ਟੋਪਿਕ, ਬਟ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੁਣ ਜੰਗ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਇਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਰਸ਼ੀਆ ਅਤੇ ਯੂਕਰੇਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਐਂਡ ਆਈ ਹੈਡ ਚਾਂਸ ਟੂ ਗੋ ਯੂਕਰੇਨ। ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਛੋਟੀ ਜਿਹੀ ਐਗਜ਼ਾਮਪਲ ਦੇ ਦੇਣਾ, ਉੱਥੇ ਆਈ ਥਿੰਕ 73 ਚੈਰਿਟੀਜ਼ ਸੀਗੀਆਂ ਮਡੀਕਾ ਬਾਰਡਰ 'ਤੇ, ਹੈ ਨਾ। ਉਹ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਚੈਰਿਟੀ ਕਰ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਸਨ, ਅਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਕਿਸੇ ਫਿਰਕੇ ਦੀ ਚੈਰਿਟੀ ਸੀ। ਯੂ ਵੋਂਟ ਬਿਲੀਵ ਕਿ ਜਦੋਂ ਉਹ ਆਪਣਾ ਲੰਗਰ ਦੇ ਰਹੇ ਸਨ, ਉਹ ਦੇਖ ਰਹੇ ਸਨ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਆਪਣੇ ਬੰਦੇ ਨੂੰ ਹੀ ਲੰਗਰ ਦੇ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ, ਦੂਸਰੇ ਬੰਦੇ ਨੂੰ ਲੰਗਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਦਿੰਦੇ। ਅਤੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ 4 ਚੈਰਿਟੀਆਂ ਉੱਥੇ ਮੋਹਰੇ ਦੁਆਰ 'ਤੇ ਖੜੀਆਂ ਸਨ। ਵੀਵ ਗੋਟ ਨਥਿੰਗ ਟੂ ਡੂ ਵਿਦ ਦੈਟ ਵਾਰ, ਪਰ ਵੀ ਆਰ ਸਟਿਲ ਜਸਟ ਅਕਾਲ ਪੁਰਖ ਦੀ ਫੌਜ ਦਾ ਫਰਜ਼ ਨਿਭਾ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਜੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਲੋੜ ਹੈ ਅਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਸ ਦਾ ਲੋੜ ਦੇਵਾਂਗੇ। ਭਾਈ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ ਕਿਸਾਨੀ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ, ਇੱਕ ਬੜਾ ਵਧੀਆ ਐਗਜ਼ਾਮਪਲ ਸੀਗਾ। ਜਿਹੜੇ ਪੁਲਿਸ ਵਾਲੇ ਡਾਂਗਾ ਮਾਰਦੇ ਸੀ ਅਗਲੇ ਦਿਨ, ਇਹ ਸਵੇਰੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਲੰਗਰ ਛਕਾਉਂਦੇ ਸੀ। ਬਰਗਾੜੀ ਮੋਰਚੇ 'ਤੇ ਵੀ ਇਹੀ ਹੋਇਆ। ਬਰਗਾੜੀ ਮੋਰਚੇ 'ਤੇ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਅਟੈਕ ਕੀਤਾ ਮੁੜ ਕੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ 'ਤੇ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਵੇਰੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਚਾਹ ਪਾਣੀ ਲੰਗਰ ਪਿਲਾਇਆ ਸੀ। ਬਟ ਇਹ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦਾ ਸਿਧਾਂਤ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਡਿਸਕ੍ਰਿਮੀਨੇਟ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦੇ। ਭੁੱਖ ਤਾਂ ਸਭ ਨੂੰ ਲੱਗਦੀ ਹੈ, ਕੋਈ ਨਹੀਂ, ਇਹਨੂੰ ਖਵਾ ਦਿਓ, ਕੋਈ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ। ਪਰ ਇਹ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਵਿਲੱਖਣ ਸਿਧਾਂਤ ਹੈ, ਉਹਦੇ ਤੋਂ ਦੂਜੇ ਰਾਜਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਹੋਣੀ ਹੈ। ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇਹ ਮੈਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਹਿ ਰਿਹਾ, ਇਹ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਗੋਰਿਆਂ ਦਾ ਇੱਕ ਰਾਈਟਰ ਹੈ GW ਲੈਟਨਰ, ਜਿਹਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਜਿਹਨੂੰ ਰਿਸਰਚ ਕਰਨ ਭੇਜਿਆ ਗਿਆ ਸੀ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੇ ਰਾਜ 'ਤੇ, ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਮਹਾਰਾਜਾ ਰਣਜੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਦਾ ਰਾਜ ਇਜ਼ ਵਨ ਆਫ ਦ ਮੋਸਟ ਐਜੂਕੇਟਿਡ ਵਨ। ਇੱਥੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਕੈਪੀਟਲ ਪਨਿਸ਼ਮੈਂਟ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਈ, ਇੱਥੇ ਲੋਕੀ ਖੁਸ਼ ਨੇ, ਲੋਕੀ ਗਰੀਬ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗੇ। ਡਿਸਪੈਰਿਟੀ ਬਿਟਵੀਨ ਦ ਹੈਵ ਐਂਡ ਦ ਹੈਵ ਨਾਟਸ ਇਜ਼ ਨਾਟ ਦੈਟ ਪ੍ਰੋਮੀਨੈਂਟ। ਅਤੇ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਰਾਜ ਹੈ, ਜੇ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਇਹ ਰਾਜ ਅੱਜ ਦੁਨੀਆ 'ਤੇ ਹੋਵੇ, then everybody will be wanting that governance. And that's the main reason they don't want you to have your territorial supremacy of a geographical area, ਕਿ ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉੱਥੇ ਰਾਜ ਬਣਾ ਲਿਆ। ਔਰ ਭਾਈ ਮਾਨਸ ਜੀ ਨੇ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਸਿੱਖ ਇਸਟੈਬਲਿਸ਼ਮੈਂਟ ਸਨ, ਚਾਹੇ ਉਹ ਗੋਇੰਦਵਾਲ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਹੋਏ, ਚਾਹੇ ਕਰਤਾਰਪੁਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਹੋਏ, ਪਰ ਇੱਕ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਡਿਫਰੈਂਸ ਗੁਰੂ ਹਰਗੋਬਿੰਦ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹ ਨੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਅਕਾਲ ਤਖਤ ਦੀ ਰਚਨਾ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ, ਅਸੀਂ ਵਾਰ-ਵਾਰ ਵਰਡ ਯੂਜ਼ ਕੀਤਾ ਨਾ, ਅਕਾਲ ਤਖਤ। ਦੇਖੋ, ਤਖਤ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਕਿਸੇ ਰਾਜ ਦਾ। ਉਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਹਿੰਦੁਸਤਾਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਦਿੱਲੀ ਦਾ ਤਖਤ ਸੀ, ਅਤੇ ਦਿੱਲੀ ਦੇ ਤਖਤ ਦੇ ਮੁਕਾਬਲੇ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੇ ਅਕਾਲ ਦਾ ਤਖਤ ਬਣਾਇਆ। ਔਰ ਇਹ ਮੈਂ ਆਪੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਬਣਾ ਰਿਹਾ, ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਉਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਰਿਸਟ੍ਰਿਕਸ਼ਨ ਸੀਗੀਆਂ ਕਿ ਤਖਤ ਐਡਾ ਉੱਚਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋ ਸਕਦਾ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਨਿਸ਼ਾਨ ਨਹੀਂ ਚਲਾ ਸਕਦੇ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸ਼ਸਤਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਰੱਖ ਸਕਦੇ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਘੋੜ ਸਵਾਰੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਬਾਜ ਨਹੀਂ ਰੱਖ ਸਕਦੇ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਲਗੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਲਾ ਸਕਦੇ। ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਰਿਸਟ੍ਰਿਕਸ਼ਨਸ ਤੋੜੀਆਂ ਜਸਟ ਫॉर ਦ ਬਗਾਵਤ, ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਦੱਸਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਖਾਂਦੇ, ਅਸੀਂ ਉਸ ਅਕਾਲ ਦਾ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਖਾਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਅਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਅਕਾਲ ਤਖਤ 'ਤੇ ਹੁਣ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੇ ਫੈਸਲੇ ਹੋਣਗੇ। ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਉਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਦੀ ਗੌਰਮੈਂਟ ਨੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਫਤਵਾ ਦੇ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਨੂੰ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਕਰਨ ਦਾ, ਫਿਰ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ ਡਿਸਾਈਡ ਕੀਤਾ ਵੀ ਸਿੱਖ ਹੁਣ ਕਿਸੇ ਹੋਰ ਤੋਂ ਇਨਸਾਫ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੈਣਗੇ, ਸਾਡੀ ਆਪਣੀ ਸੋਵਰੈਨਿਟੀ ਹੋਏਗੀ, ਸਾਡਾ ਆਪਣਾ ਤਖਤ ਹੋਏਗਾ, ਸਾਡੇ ਫੈਸਲੇ, ਸਾਡੀ ਕਮਾਂਡ ਇੱਥੋਂ ਹੋਏਗੀ। ਅਤੇ ਤਾਈਓ ਅਕਾਲ ਤਖਤ ਜਿੰਨੀਆਂ ਵੀ ਰਜੀਮਸ ਆਈਆਂ, ਉਹ ਸਭ ਦੇ ਟਾਰਗੇਟ 'ਤੇ ਰਿਹਾ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇੱਕ ਤਖਤ ਨੂੰ ਬਰਦਾਸ਼ਤ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਕਿ ਉਹਦੀ ਟੈਰੀਟਰੀ 'ਚ ਕੋਈ ਹੋਰ ਤਖਤ ਹੋਵੇ। ਐਂਡ ਦੈਟਸ ਵਾਈ ਅਕਾਲ ਤਖਤ ਹੈਜ਼ ਬੀਨ ਅਟੈਕਡ again and again, time and again.
And it goes back to Guru Nanak Badshah. Guru Nanak Sahib sanu sikhonde raje sheh muqaddam kutte, and they call the rulers and their administrators, the rulers are like tigers, and the administrators are like dogs, and ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਤੰਗ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸੁੱਤੇ ਪਏ when they're like in a position of vulnerability, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਖੂਨ ਕੱਢਦੇ ਆ, like they're harassing the people, and like that is a straight vanguard, like they're calling Babbar a Zabar, challenging that system of that time. They didn't say, oh, like let's Guru Nanak Pasha didn't say let's join the Mughal Darbar and then hopefully we'll work in the inside and one day sada Guru Mughal di takht de utte baithuga. It was never an option to like kind of coexist with them. It was about recognizing of how their power is structured. That's why by Satta Balwan di jehdi war hondi Nanak Raj chalaya Sachkot Satani Neev de, that jehda Raj Guru Nanak Pasha ne chaya is resting on a completely different foundation. Ode vichoo hi sarvat de phale da siddhant nikalda aya Halimi Raj, and the Halimi Raj from Guru Arjan Pasha sab sukhali vuttiyan eh hua Halimi Raj jo, and the first line is hun hukum hua mehraban da ki Guru Sahib wallo Akal Purkh wallo Sikhan nu hukum hai ki tusi raj karna, and then unless you're in that position je tada raj nahi hega, twaddi sata nahi hegi. And from like early guruship, the Atyasik, the Atyas of the Panth is from early guruship period, Kaur Savari, Shastar Katthe Karne, that starts happening from Guru Arjan Sahib Pasha's time. It doesn't happen something later. And this, line of the first 5 gurus were essentially like, Bhagats and pacifists, and the next 5 were militants. It comes from Angrez, right? MacLeod. Yeah, he's the one who kind of comes up with this idea. So, and and always, you might hear that from Apne Bande nowadays, like that, the first 5 were different,
Peaceful.
but we know that ek jyot sigi, and that same power, that same jyot is manifested through the Khalsa. There's no separation between Guru Granth and Guru Panth. And our Sikh spaces are just as important part of that, whether it's our Bunge, whether it's our from the Dharamsala to like the Manji system, the missile Marjivari Jathe of the missile system, the Jujaru Jathe later, these are all part of that same manifesting structures of the Panth. So the Panth as an entity has to move and exist in some form, and the becoming Jatheband is an incredibly important part of that. Sikhs always moved in autonomous Jathe, this idea of Hanne Miri, every Sikh is a Raja. Like when the Angrez comes to Lahore Darbar, he wasn't able to recognize that Maharaj Ranjit Singh kaun hai, unnu sare Raje des because it was that attitude that they had कि सानू गुरु साहब ने पातशाही बख्शी जहाँ जहाँ बेज़मीन मल तहाँ तहाँ तख्त बनाए. Like they had that attitude that असी राजे हैं, असी किसी दी अधीनगी नहीं कबूल करनी, and they're gonna manifest that, and they're gonna I remember somebody telling me that Sakhi once said like Angrez meets Nahang Singh, and he says, who's take me to your leader type situation, and he points at his spear, and then then he says, oh, like no, who's above you, and then he points up to Akal Purkh, and then no, he says, take me to your leader, and he says, I'm the leader. Then he says, who's above you, and he says, points to Akal Purkh, and then he says, no, but who's like in between, and he points to the Shastar. So it's like that kind of attitude where kisi da dawa nahi manna, and you see that like I was saying, you see it continuously. But Darbar Sahib 84, where this whole kind of series is revolving around, is such an important moment, because in that moment, all of everything we're talking about, this idea, this Padshahi, this dushman de naal takkar leni, Khalsa soe Malesh se chare, this idea of Khalsa kare nit jang, all of that is rejuvenated around Darbar Sahib again in like the 80s. And it's no coincidence that it's happening in that way. Sikh dwara fir jatheband hon lag pe, they started manifesting that Padshahi. Like Sanji famously says, oh, if je tade kol shastar nahi hege, police waleyan kolo kholo, is Khalsa di, it's a walking armory, Khalsa di armory. I like that attitude that they had. And give you another example as well, like Sardar Baghel Singh Sakhi, many people may have heard it, where, like the narrative is like, is he Delhi te kinni wari fateh kiti hai? And you heard it during the farmers' protests as well, people saying like, is he Delhi jettalani hai? Is he unni wari Delhi de utte, fateh kiti hai? Like we've conquered Delhi, the Red Fort, the Khalsas, had their Nishan Sahib. So when Sardar Baghel Singh goes in one of those, examples, when he goes to the Red Fort of Delhi to capture it, he takes 13,000 Ghor Sawar Fauj with him, and there's a place in that area called Tis Hazari Court, which is named 30,000. It's named after that force that arrived to take over Delhi, and that's where the court district is. And when they take over the Lal Killa, they not only put the Nishan Sahib there, they take the brick from the highest point of the Lal Killa and put it at the lowest point in Darbar Sahib in one of the bunge. They take the throne from the Lal Killa, drag it all the way back to Akal Takhat and smash it in front of Akal Takhat, and then they impose a tax on the Delhi Sultanate at that time कि तुसी लोकां कोलों tax कट्ठी करदे हुन you're going to pay the tax to the Khalsa because you've lost your right because zulm कीता तुसी, right? You've crossed that line कि हुन is not acceptable. And you see that whether it's Bota Singh, Garja Singh, like those Sikh, they hear the Mughal saying Sikh ta mar gaye, si luk gaye, dar gaye, and they put a roadblock in the middle of the road and ujuj ke utte shaheed on there. They didn't have a need to do that. They could have on our like kind of manmukh buddhi mere varga, oh, we'll do this, we'll do it like this, we'll go somewhere else, we'll hide and we'll do something else, right? Unhone de faisla karke si juj ke utte shaheed pani. Whether it's the Shote Sahibzade that where we've kind of turned their story into like they were shaheed because they refused to convert to Islam. But that was ਜਿਹੜੀ Islam ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਬੂਲ ਕਰਨੀ ਸੀਗੀ ਉਹ ਅਸੀਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਕਬੂਲ ਕਰ ਗਏ ਆ, like in terms of like living under the Raj of the Christian monarch here. They were given everything, every lalach, dunya vi tanu raje banaunge. That was the lalach they were given, right? It wasn't like you're going to convert to Islam and carry on like a normal citizen. You're going to be part of the ruling elite. You're going to be treated like that. But they enter into Wazir Khan's darbar with their juttiyan first. ਅਸੀਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਚੀਜ਼ ਨੂੰ ਠੋਕਰ ਮਾਰਦੇ ਆ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸ਼ਸਤਰ ਦਿਓ, ਅਸੀਂ ਫੌਜ ਕਾਇਮ ਕਰਨੀ ਆ. That's what we want, that's our desire. We want shastar, we want to fight. And they were told your guru's dead, your Khalsa's finished, everything's destroyed, what are you fighting for? And but ਫਿਰ ਵੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ like they had that desire ਕਿ that education that they had like from their ancestors, their elders, this is what Sikhi is. And like in many ways we've turned that like Sakhi again, like that Thanda Burj, into a sad story. Like they were suffering, they were cold, and bahut dukh bari katna hai. But for me that Thanda Burj is the pinnacle of Sikhi. Like that's the lighthouse, that's what we want. Sanu ਅਸੀਂ ਤਾਂ ਲੋਚਦੇ ਆ ਇਦਾਂ ਦੀ ਸ਼ਹਾਦਤ ਹੋਵੇ, ਇਦਾਂ ਦਾ like ਕੋਈ ਮੌਕਾ ਮਿਲੇ. That's the type of death that a Sikh has always desired, and you see it like coming again in Darbar Sahib in June 84 and continuously. Darbar Sahib, like I said, has been occupied so many times. Massa Rangar huni de samay de utte Sukha Singh, Mehtab Singh jande a like to Fateh Darbar Sahib, Baba Deep Singh's Sakhi. And then again, like, see Sant Janel Singh huni, like, it's that same spirit from like Jamkaur di Gari to Darbar Sahib. And there's a declassified document from the Angrez, and they say that like after the Darbar Sahib battle, they would send the Gora agent, the English agent in India, sends a communication to Whitehall here, which is like the parliament, whatever. And he says in that thing, he says, when he's talking about Sant Janel Singh, he says, such a view, the view that the Indians have overlooks the Sikh tradition and history of which Bhindranwale was a creation. It overlooks the socio-economic conditions which have combined to provide fertile breeding ground for radical elements, just as it ignores the driving force of Sikhism, which continues to be a search for an egalitarian society. Bhindranwale was the latest incarnation of this fundamental strain that has run through Sikhism since its genesis. So
it's interesting how our opponents always recognize.
Always. Even the Mughals as well, man. Like they recognized from day one. They're like, it's jo Veer Ji kende sige, Ampaji was saying that they're calling Guru Sahib Sache Padshah. And the Gore recognized it the same way that, eh sadda Raj nahi mande, saddi een nahi mande. And the same way, like Indira Gandhi recognized it, don't give them the Anandpur Sahib resolution because they don't really want that. What they really want is Raj.
It's interesting, even after 40 years, we reframe, and our perspective on Jalasi's is so different. But like in 84, the British are saying that this is what their true pursuit is. The pursuit for an egalitarian society will never stop, right?
In Pant Prakash, the first question Captain Murray asks Ratan Singh Pangu, the first dialogue in Pant Prakash is, Tanu Raj karan da haq kitton milya? And he says, Guru Nanak Pasha ne ditta hai, and he says, Guru Nanak is a fakir. Like, unu ki pata Raj da, and he says, no, Guru Nanak Sahib Rajan ke Raja, he's like the ruler that, this is where we've got our haq for Raj from. It's always been part of it. That, and this is why we have our Shastra today, not because of the law allows us to. Eta Guru Sahib lo hukam ya adesh ya, And because our ancestors did not submit under the rule of the colonizer, that's why we have a right to wear our shastar, because it represents our sovereignty, not anything else. It's not a symbol of our faith or our culture or whatever. It's literally our the shortest shastar hi paune, but vaddiyan karpana rakhde. Chalo aun wale samay ch, again there's going to be a restriction most likely, and there was before. There's a sakhi of where the Angrez tried to take the karpana from the Sikhs, and they sent a bacha and they said Edi Karpan Lakid, you know which sakhi I'm talking about? Do you know which one I'm talking about?
When they give you and they go take it Siri Sahib, na?
Yeah, take it off the kid. They were like Edi bache di Lakid kha diyo Karpan, and they beat the little kid to give him to give the Karpan up, and he wouldn't give it. So it's always been part of us in that way.
Just to finish off that period then, because we kind of talked up to Shere Pasha Ji, and then our 7th Guru Har Rai Sahib Ji, of the button of Shere Pasha, they had the Abaiso Kaur Sawar, 2200 soldiers traveling with them, and then even then with Aurangzeb asking for Satve Pasha's darshan, and they didn't go. They sent their son Ram Rai, and then Guru Harkishan Sahib Ji Sama, where Guru Sahib Ji refused to give their darshan to Aurangzeb, and that's a whole story in itself. If it's okay, can we just touch a little bit upon Nove Pashi, Shahidi and Dasve Pashi, because I think that touches a lot upon the identity of the Khalsa, because we've mentioned this word Khalsa, and then later on Khalistan, but obviously I'm not saying that there's a link. There could be a link between two. You guys can please explain that, but that's just like that period of time, and that's like a big part in what we're fighting for today, right? And the identity of the Sikh as well.
I think when we ask Kavi Senapat about Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji Shahidi, he says he does not coins that thing as Hind each other. He says Pragat Pai Guru Tegh Bahadur Sagal Shrisht Peta each other. That's the word he used, And if we ask Maharaj, then says Santan Het Etijan Kari Sees Diya Par Sina Uchri. Asal ch gall eh hai ki before these English terms were ever coined, religious freedom, freedom of expression, freedom of political view, Maharaj gave Shahidi for this very reason. Maharaj does not align with Hinduism. We do not follow Hinduism. We don't follow their rituals, and we are rather speaking against them in some ways, when we read Gurbani. But then Maharaj says that nobody has a right to violate anybody's else sovereignty or integrity. And I am okay to give Shahidi for that, no problem. But this is to just tell the Sikhs that a time ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਤੇ ਵੀ ਆਉਣਾ, ਇਹ ਟਾਈਮ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਤੇ ਵੀ ਆਉਣਾ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸੱਚ ਲਈ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਲੜ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ। ਇਸ ਜਦੋਂ ਇਹ ਸੱਚ ਨੂੰ ਖਤਰਾ ਪਏਗਾ, then you will have to sometime give your own blood or fight for justice to whatever extent it gets to. And it is very clear ਕਿ ਸਾਡਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਿਧਾਂਤ ਹੈ, ਜਿੱਦਾਂ whatever Shamsher Paji just explained, some people might think that they're very arrogant, these people are. They say hanne Padshahi, Asi Raje and all that. But one thing we need to understand is ਜਿਹੜੇ Sikh ਨੇ ਉਹ understand ਕਰਨਗੇ ਕਿ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ you have to give up your ego. When we ask Guru Sahib ਤੁਸੀਂ ਮੇਰਾ ਭਲਾ ਕਰੋ, then what does Guru Sahib says is ਪਹਿਲਾ ਮਰਨ ਕਬੂਲ ਜੀਵਨ ਕੀ ਛਡਾਸ ਹੋਂ ਸਭਨਾ ਕੀ ਰੇਣਕਾ ਤੋਂ ਆਓ ਹਮਾਰੇ ਪਾਸ। ਇਹਦੇ 'ਚ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਤੀਜਾ ਪਾਰਟ ਹੈ ਉਹਦੇ 'ਚ ਹੋਂ ਸਭਨਾ ਕੀ ਰੇਣਕਾ, ਤੁਹਾਡੇ 'ਚ ਹਉਮੈ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਣੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ। ਅੱਜ ਹਥਿਆਰ ਹਰ ਇੱਕ ਕੋਲ ਹੈ, ਕੰਟਰੀਜ਼ ਕੋਲ ਹਥਿਆਰ ਹੈ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਕੋਲ ਨਿਊਕਲੀਅਰ ਵੈਪਨਸ ਨੇ ਜਿਸ ਕੰਟਰੀ 'ਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਬੈਠੇ ਹਾਂ, ਇੰਡੀਆ ਕੋਲ ਨੇ, ਤੇ ਪਰ ਉਹਦਾ ਕੋਲ ਹਉਮੈ ਵੀ ਹੈ। So
ਹਥਿਆਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਗਰੀਬਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਹੀ ਮਾਰਦੇ।
Exactly, it is highly likely that they will actually use those ਹਥਿਆਰ to oppress someone. But ਜਦੋਂ ਖਾਲਸੇ ਕੋਲ ਹਥਿਆਰ ਆਉਂਦਾ, ਜਦੋਂ ਖਾਲਸੇ ਕੋਲ ਤਾਕਤ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਹੈ, ਬੰਦਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਬਹਾਦਰ ਕੋਲ ਪਹਿਲਾ ਰਾਜ ਆਇਆ ਤੇ ਉਹਨੇ ਜ਼ਮੀਨ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੰਡ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਜ਼ਮੀਨ ਵਾਰੇ ਸਨ। He abolished the ਜ਼ਮੀਨਦਾਰੀ system, gave the ਜ਼ਮੀਨ to the people who were actually cultivating it. Then ਜਦੋਂ ਮਹਾਰਾਜਾ ਰਣਜੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਦਾ ਰਾਜ ਆਇਆ, no discrimination, ਜਿੰਨਾ ਕੋ ਸੋਨਾ ਦਰਬਾਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਤੇ ਚੜਿਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਕੋ ਸੋਨਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਮੰਦਰਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਦਾਨ ਦੇ ਦਿੱਤਾ, ਮਸਜਿਦਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਦੇ ਦਿੱਤਾ। ਸੋ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਸਾਈਕੀ ਹੈ, ਜਿਹਦੇ ਤੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਪਜਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਇਸ ਭੈ ਕਾਹੂ ਕੋ ਦੇਤਨਾ ਨੈ ਭੈ ਮਾਨਤਾ। ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਡਰਾ ਕੇ ਰਾਜ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਾਇਮ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ, ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਡਰਾਉਣਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ, ਪਰ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਤੋਂ ਡਰਨਾ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ। ਐਂਡ ਦੈਟ ਇਜ਼ ਵੈਰੀ ਮਚ ਇਨ ਫੇਸ, ਕਾਜ਼ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਮਟੀਰੀਅਲਿਜ਼ਮ ਦੀ ਟੈਨਸ਼ਨ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ। ਹਾਂ, ਹੁਣ ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਥੋੜ੍ਹੇ ਜਿਹੇ ਆਈ ਵੁੱਡ ਲਾਈਕ ਟੂ ਸੇ ਕਿ ਥੋੜ੍ਹੇ ਡਿਲਿਊਡ ਹੋ ਗਏ ਹਾਂ। ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਮਟੀਰੀਅਲਿਜ਼ਮ ਹਾਵੀ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ। ਇੱਕ ਪੁਰਾਣੀ ਕਹਾਵਤ ਸੀ, ਜਦੋਂ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਕੱਚੇ ਸੀਗੇ, ਸਿੱਖ ਪੱਕੇ ਸੀਗੇ। ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਕੋਲ ਇੰਨਾ ਮਟੀਰੀਅਲਿਜ਼ਮ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ, ਘਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀਗੇ, ਬਾਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀਗੇ, ਕੰਮਕਾਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀਗੇ ਇੰਨੇ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ। ਸੋ ਦੇ ਵਰ ਕੰਪਲੀਟਲੀ ਫਰੀ। ਕਦੀ ਕੋਈ ਮੋਰਚਾ ਲੱਗਿਆ ਸੀ, ਹੁਣੇ ਛੱਡ ਕੇ ਚਲੋ ਜੀ, ਚਲੇ ਜਾਓ, ਕੋਈ ਚੱਕਰ ਨਹੀਂ, ਚਾਹੇ ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀਆਂ ਵੀ ਦੇਣੀਆਂ ਪੈਣ। ਸੋ ਦੈਟ ਐਟੀਟਿਊਡ ਜੋ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ ਕੀਤਾ ਉਸ ਵੇਲੇ, ਉਹ ਸੰਤਨ ਹੇਤ ਤੀਜਨ ਕਰੀ। ਕਿਸੇ ਧਰਮ ਲਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਮੈਂ ਕਹਾਂਗਾ, ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੇ ਉਸ ਧਰਮ ਲਈ ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਅਕਾਲ ਪੁਰਖ ਨੇ ਇਸ ਦੁਨੀਆ 'ਤੇ ਬਿਸਟੋ ਕੀਤਾ। ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਬੰਦੇ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਹਾ, ਬੰਦੇ ਬੰਦਗੀ ਇਖਤਿਆਰ, ਤੂੰ ਆਪਣੀ ਲਿਮਿਟ 'ਚ ਰਹਿਣਾ, ਤੂੰ ਬੰਦਾ ਹੈ ਪਰਮਾਤਮਾ ਦਾ, ਤੂੰ ਰੱਬ ਬਣਨ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਨਾ ਕਰੀ, ਆਪਣੀ ਲਿਮਿਟ 'ਚ ਰਹੀਂ। ਉਸ ਲਿਮਿਟ ਨੂੰ ਵਾਪਸ ਸਥਾਪਿਤ ਕਰਨ ਲਈ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦਾ ਰਾਜ ਆਉਂਦਾ। ਔਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੇਖੋਗੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਅਰਜਨ ਦੇਵ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹ ਦੇ ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਅਕਾਲ ਤਖਤ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੀ ਰਚਨਾ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ। ਗੁਰੂ ਤੇਗ ਬਹਾਦਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜੀ ਦੀ ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਖਾਲਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਪ੍ਰਗਟ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ। ਠੀਕ ਹੈ, ਇੱਕ ਫਾਰਮੂਲੇਟ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤਾ। ਹੁਣ ਕਿ ਇੱਕ ਚੀਜ਼ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਮੈਨ ਮੇਡ, ਜਿਹਨੂੰ ਬਣਾਇਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ, ਇੱਕ ਚੀਜ਼ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਜਿਹਨੂੰ ਰਿਵੀਲ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ, ਜਿਹਨੂੰ ਪ੍ਰਗਟ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ। ਔਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਇਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਖਾਲਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਪ੍ਰਗਟ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ। ਇਹਦਾ ਮਤਲਬ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਤੋਂ, ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੇ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਫਾਰਮੂਲੇਟ ਕਰਕੇ, ਪ੍ਰਗਟ ਕਰਕੇ ਇੱਕ ਪੰਥ ਚਲਾ ਦਿੱਤਾ, ਇੱਕ ਪੰਥ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਨਵਰਟ ਕਰਤਾ। ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਜੇ ਇਸ ਪੰਥ ਨੂੰ ਫਾਰਮੂਲੇਟ ਨਾ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਤੇ ਰਿਸਕ ਹੋਏਗਾ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਕਿਤੇ ਖੋ ਜਾਏਗਾ, ਐਸੀਮੂਲੇਟ ਹੋ ਜਾਏਗਾ ਜਾਂ ਇੱਧਰ ਉੱਧਰ ਚੱਲ ਜਾਏਗਾ, ਹੈ ਨਾ। ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਇੱਕ ਪੁਰਾਣੀ ਕਹਾਵਤ ਹੈ, ਅਗਰ ਪੰਥ ਨਾ ਰਹਾ ਤਾਂ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਕੋ ਕੌਣ ਮਾਨੇਗਾ। ਜਦੋਂ ਦੂਸਰਾ ਘੱਲੂਕਾਰਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਤੇ ਸਿੱਖ ਅਰਦਾਸ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ ਵੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਿਰਪਾ ਕਰੋ, ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਦੁਬਾਰਾ ਫਲਰਿਸ਼ ਕਰੋ। ਤੇ ਅਸਲ ਗੱਲ ਇਹ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦਾ ਜਜ਼ਬਾ ਹੈ, ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੇ ਸਿਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਮੁੱਲ ਪੈ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਨੇ। ਦੂਸਰੇ ਘੱਲੂਕਾਰੇ 'ਚ ਤਕਰੀਬਨ ਆਈ ਥਿੰਕ 2/3 ਆਫ ਸਿੱਖ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੇ ਐਲੀਮੀਨੇਟ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਨੇ। ਫਿਰ ਥੋੜ੍ਹੇ ਚਿਰਾਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਸਿੱਖ ਰਾਜ ਕਾਇਮ ਕਰ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਨੇ। ਹਾਲੇ ਸਾਹਿਬਜ਼ਾਦਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਹੋਇਆ 10 ਸਾਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਤੇ ਸਿੱਖ ਰਾਜ ਕਾਇਮ ਕਰ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਨੇ। ਇਹ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੀ ਸਪਿਰਿਟ ਹੈ। ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਸਿੱਖ ਹਉਮੈ ਲਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੜਦੇ। ਸਿੱਖ ਆਪਣਾ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਹਾਰਟ ਕਲੀਨ ਹੈ, ਉਹ ਲੜਦੇ ਨੇ। ਔਰ ਫਿਰ ਅਕਾਲ ਪੁਰਖ ਉਹਨਾਂ 'ਤੇ ਕਿਰਪਾ ਕਰਦਾ, ਹੈ ਨਾ। ਜਦੋਂ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਣਾ ਸਾਰਾ ਤੇਜ ਦੇ ਦਿੱਤਾ, ਬਸ ਜਬ ਇਹ ਗਏ ਵਿਪਰਨ ਕੀ ਰੀਤ ਮੈਂ ਨਾ ਕਰੋ ਇਨ ਕੀ ਪ੍ਰਤੀਤ। ਜਦੋਂ ਇਹ ਗਲਤ ਪਾਸੇ ਤੁਰਨਗੇ, ਜੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਅੱਜ ਰਾਜ ਨਹੀਂ ਮਿਲ ਰਿਹਾ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਜੀਓਗ੍ਰਾਫੀਕਲ ਰਾਜ ਹੈ। ਮੈਂ ਇੱਕ ਗੱਲ ਇੱਥੇ ਵੀ ਕਹਿ ਦਾਂ, ਸਿੱਖ ਸਪਿਰਿਚੁਅਲੀ ਇੰਡੀਪੈਂਡੈਂਟ ਹੈ। ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦਾ ਰਾਜ, ਜਦੋਂ ਗੁਰੂ ਰਾਮਦਾਸ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਰਾਜ ਜੋਗ ਤਖਤ ਦੀਨ ਗੁਰੂ ਰਾਮਦਾਸ। ਅਸੀਂ ਸਿੱਖ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਹਾਂ ਸਪਿਰਿਚੁਅਲੀ ਵੀ ਫਰੀ ਹਾਂ, ਸਾਈਕੋਲੋਜੀਲੀ ਵੀ ਫਰੀ ਹਾਂ। ਚਾਹੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਜੇਲ੍ਹ ਦੇ ਅੰਦਰ ਪਾ ਦਿਓ, ਅਸੀਂ ਫਿਰ ਵੀ ਦਿਮਾਗੀ ਤੌਰ 'ਤੇ, ਜ਼ਹਿਨੀ ਤੌਰ 'ਤੇ, ਧਾਰਮਿਕ ਤੌਰ 'ਤੇ, ਸਪਿਰਿਚੁਅਲ ਤੌਰ 'ਤੇ ਫਰੀ ਹਾਂ, ਆਜ਼ਾਦ ਹਾਂ। ਹਾਂ, ਹੁਣ ਗੱਲ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਟੈਰੀਟਰੀ ਦੀ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਰਹਿਣਾ ਤਾਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਘਰ ਤਾਂ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਨਾ। ਸੋ ਉਸ ਘਰ ਨੂੰ ਬਣਾਉਣ ਲਈ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਲੜਾਈ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ, ਉਹ ਵੀ ਉਨੀ ਹੀ ਸੱਚੀ ਹੈ ਜਿੰਨੀ ਲੜਾਈ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸੱਚ ਲਈ ਲੜਦੇ ਹੋ। ਇਹ ਸਾਡੀ ਕਈ ਵਾਰੀ ਇੱਕ ਕਮਜ਼ੋਰ ਸਾਈਕੀ ਹੈ, ਜਦੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਹਿ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਨਹੀਂ, ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੀ ਵਾਰ ਤਾਂ ਕਦੀ ਟੈਰੀਟੋਰੀਅਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੀ। ਟੈਰੀਟੋਰੀਅਲ, ਇਟ ਹੈਜ਼ ਬੀਨ ਟੈਰੀਟੋਰੀਅਲ ਫਰੋਮ ਡੇ 1। ਅਨੰਦਪੁਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੂੰ ਛੱਡਣਾ ਇੱਕ ਟੈਰੀਟੋਰੀਅਲ ਇਸ਼ੂ ਸੀ। ਪਹਾੜੀ ਰਾਜਿਆਂ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਮੁਗਲਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਵੀ ਅਨੰਦਪੁਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਛੱਡੋ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਸੋਵਰੈਨਿਟੀ ਨੂੰ ਖਤਰਾ ਸੀ ਉੱਥੇ। ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੂੰ ਦਰਬਾਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ 'ਚ ਵਾਪਸ ਨਾ ਜਾਣ ਦੇਣਾ, ਹੈ ਨਾ, ਇਹ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਇਸ਼ੂ ਹੈ। ਸੋ ਕਹਿਣ ਤੋਂ ਭਾਵ, ਇਹ ਸਾਰੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਇਸ਼ੂਜ਼ ਨੇ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਕੰਟੈਕਸਟ ਨੂੰ ਸਮਝ ਕੇ ਹੀ then we'll be able to kind of explain what this ladai is all about and what this whole issue is all about.
To your point, I think, some people say, right, like you hear this argument that some people say, within Panthic spaces, that Sikhs, our Raj is meant to be a mental state, that it's not a physical Raj, as the point BG is making. That it's some kind of akashic manifestation. It's in it's not on this physical plane.
It's a mentality.
Yeah, it's a mentality. The Raj is a mentality. But for me, like the clearest evidence that viewpoint is limited and flawed is like a langar. Langar ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜ਼ਮੀਨ ਤੇ ਬੈਠ ਕੇ ਛਕਦੇ ਆ, the ਭੋਜਨ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਖਾਣਾ ਪੈਣਾ for your sarir, right? The langar is made because of the Nishan Sahib, because Guru Sahib is Brajman on their Takhat, Guru Sahib is on their Takhat. That's why there's langar, because when you make langar, ਉਹਨੂੰ ਭੋਗ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਹੈ, ਅਰਦਾਸ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ, it's a part of it. ਤੁਸੀਂ ਫਿਰ ਜ਼ਮੀਨ ਤੇ ਬੈਠ ਕੇ ਛਕਦੇ ਆ, like your physical and social needs are fulfilled in that space through an institution of the Khalsa. The langar is a foundational revolutionary space. It's not just you're feeding people because you're hungry, you're teaching them why they don't have food as well, innit? Like you're going to see ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੇਗ ਆ ਦੇਖ ਲਈ ਹੁਣ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਤੇਗ ਵੀ ਚੱਕਣੀ ਪਊਗੀ at some
To
time.
protect that.
Yeah, to protect that. And you know, like ਸਾਡੇ ਬੋਲਬਾਲੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਆਉਂਦਾ ਆਏਗੇ ਨੂੰ ਦੇਗ ਪੱਕੀ ਸਿਰ ਚੜੇ ਨੂੰ ਤੇਗ ਪੱਕੀ, right? Right, you know, those that come, you know, with ਨਿਮਰਤਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਦੇਗ ਮਿਲੂਗੀ, their needs will be met. And those that come with arrogance and homage, ਜਿਸ ਸਾਡੇ ਸਿਰ ਤੇ ਚੜਦੇ ਆ, they want to sit on top of us, ਫਿਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਤੇਗ ਅਸੀਂ ਦੇਵਾਂਗੇ, then ਉਹਨਾਂ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਸ਼ਾਸਤਰ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ. And you all throughout, like Guru Sahib's Shahidis, that you see Guru Sahib go to jail in 2 different forms. Shahidi vi dinde a naal de Sikh vi Satidas Matidas, they're killed in like these brutal manners because of those ideals ki unhone Mughal darbar di authority unhone nahi manani. They're not going to accept the rule or the capacity of the Mughal government to dispense justice or to do justice or to treat people as human beings. You know, Guru Sahib san kehte pura nyao kare kartar. So Guru Sahib is preparing us through those multiple forms. And jiri Sakhi Guru Nanak Paatshah de vele di hondi hai ke Guru Nanak Sahib gives the blessing to Babbar to be able to rule. ਉਹ ਵਰ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਬਾਬਰ ਨੂੰ, right? And then they also say at Babbar that in your Raj is going to commit zulm at some point, and then ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਨੇ ਸਿਰ ਦੇ ਕੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਤੇਰਾ ਰਾਜ ਆ ਖੋਹ ਲੈਣਾ. So Guru Sahib is preparing us from their first incarnation that this is the path that you have to tread, that Bikra Penda. It's a difficult, very, very difficult, very arduous path full of like thorns and like poisons and challenges. And that's why your Jivan has to be so pure and so Ucha Sucha. Your Rani Beni has to be in a certain way, because then it will carry you through that path, through those difficult circumstances. Then you'll be able to do that right thing. Like Sanjanel Singh, they were known first as Sanjanel Singh Abhyasi, and people were attached to Sanjanel Singh, same like Bhai Fauja Singh, they were attached to them because of their Jivan, their Rani Beni, because of their character. Their character was so high. And today, you know, I've heard it in many circles where people say that that we're setting the standard too high, that nobody's character can be that pure, and you know, like it's an unrealistic kind of demand that we jado Khalistan banjuga, then we'll think about these issues, or like Amrit is not as important, you know, these types of things, right? Everybody's a Sikh. You hear these types of things, or somebody will say I'm culturally a Sikh or something like that, right? But with that also Samede Sikh, we see the importance of Amrit, we see the importance of Gursikh Rani Bani. Guru Sahib and that's Ret Pyari Mujhko Sikh Pyara Nahi, right? Like Palke jo Utke jo har naam te aave, like what type of Sikh that Guru Sahib wants to see is very clear, and it has to be manifested, because it's like it's not going to work, innit? All the pieces have to fit and come together in a certain way for Halimi to be manifest. ਕਿ ਜਿਹਦੇ ਆਪ ਦੇ ਜੀਵਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਹੈ ਨਹੀਂ ਗਿਆ, ਉਹ ਹਲੀਮੀ ਰਾਜ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਪੈਦਾ ਕਰੂਗਾ? Like the Guru Sahib is setting the bar for us so incredibly high, and they literally give shahadat, you know, shahidan da sirtaj, ਪੰਜਵੇਂ ਗੁਰੂ ਜਦੋਂ ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਆ, immediately after that, you see like Sikhs mount conflict with the Mughal Darbar. But also in Guru Hargobind period's time, Sikh built a masjid, Guru Ki Masjid, which is still there, because they show that the conflict isn't with Islam, the conflict is with Zulm. The conflict with Zabar, with Takka, with, you know, you're in a position of power to see, you know, like today, you know, you've got tanks and you've got bombs and guided missiles and you're dropping them on tents, jite loki agge tangya, like, you know, to zulm karde hain, that is what the conflict is against. And Guru Sahib teaches us these like incredibly valuable lessons that continually are manifest. And again, Summit, you know, in the 1984, all of that is rejuvenated. And like your Sikh historians say that 18ਵੀਂ ਸਦੀ ਦਾ Sikh ਇਤਿਹਾਸ, which really is the golden period. You know, some people would say like Maharaj Ranjit Singh Lahore Darbar is the golden period, but you know, arguably it's not. It's the Shahidi period that comes before that missile period. ਜਦੋਂ Sikh ਜੰਗਲਾਂ 'ਚ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ, like, you know, ਜਿਹੜੀ ਭਾਜੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ, you know, they didn't have anything. They were living in jungles. They were like, you know, but they had everything at that time, because ਉਹ ਪੱਕੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਆਪਣੀ ਰਹਿਣੀ ਤੇ ਆਪਣੀ ਵਹਿਣੀ ਤੇ. And yeah,
also just want to add as well, like the success following the Shahidiyah is not just the spirit of the Sikh, it's also like the kirpa of the Shahidi. You know, we always see that is from Shahidiyah, like, you know, Bhai Fauja Singh Ji said himself that like it's going to need not just prachar and stuff, but Shahidiyah the Lord Paniya, and it's only when the earth is drenched with the bloods of the Shaheeds that like kirpa da hundi hai.
And you know, and just that idea is like, is, you know, you could dismiss it as like some kind of like, you know, mysticism or whatever, right? Like that how it's intangible, like just like ਸਾਡੀ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹੀ is like is you know ਇਹ ਸਾਡੀ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹੀ ਕਿਰਪਾਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਨਹੀਂ ਪਈ, you it's like ਜੇ ਕਿਰਪਾਨ ਲਾਤੀ ਹੁਣ ਭਾਈ ਤਾਰੂ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਕਕਾਰ ਲਾਤੇ, ਉਹ like you know late Sikhs ਜਦੋਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਕੀਤਾ ਬੰਦਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਬਹਾਦਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਕਕਾਰ ਲਾ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਆ, but ਉਹਨਾਂ 'ਚ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹੀ ਤਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਾਂਦੀ, like that ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹੀ ਖਾਨ ਇਹ ਸਾਡੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਰੰਮੀ ਹੋਈ ਆ, is diffused within us. You can ਉਹਨੇ ਦੇ ਝਲਕਾਂ ਦਿਸਦੀਆਂ ਆ, you can see the ਨਿਸ਼ਾਨ ਸਾਹਿਬ, the ਸ਼ਸਤਰ, but like that shahidi is the same way. It is an invisible path that many people can't see, but like you know people like Bhai Fauja Singh Huni, like Bibi Bimal Kaur, or just like ਮੌਜੂਦੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਦੇ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਆ, they're walking on a path that people can't see. And like for me the clearest example is Canada and Bhai Hardeep Singh Nijjar shahidi. Like Canada's environment politically like changes so dramatically in this last 1 year. It is actually like it's chartable. Like before Bhai Hardeep Singh's shahadat, like how the conversation around Raj Bagh, Badshahi, Khalistan was handled, and following their shahidi, how like even people that are disconnected from Sikhi and like the Panth and like you know some random liberal auntie or uncles that think like you know sara kuch vote de rahi nikalna hai, like you know electoral system whatever, even they are like you know sanu hak hona chahiye Khalistan di gal karan da, and even they may not understand it fully, or they may see like people having nishan sahibs, or they may see like they may just be reacting to like you know I think it was like the Indian one of the Indian government ministers was saying, oh you know like Sikhs it was when Trudeau was speaking at Nagar Kirtan, and you know there's Khalistan nare that were happening from the Sangat, and India lodged some kind of protest and said, you know, we disagree with this is wrong, you know, this should be shut down, Canada keeps giving spaces. I was watching commentary online from people that you would not think, saying, well actually no, why don't we have the right to say Khalistan? And that's directly tied to Bhai Hardeep Singh's shahadat karke loki ta ohi sige, desh bhi ohi siga, eh pehla bhi ho reha siga. It's not like you know Khalistan nare like a Nagar Kirtan or a new thing. I mean happening like you know for a very long time.
It's like ਜਬੇ ਬਾਣ ਲੱਗ ਗਿਆ ਤਾਂ ਰੋਸ ਜਾਗ ਗਿਆ,
exactly.
ਜਦੋਂ ਵੀ ਕੋਈ ਇਦਾਂ ਇੱਕ ਪੁਰਾਣੀ ਕਹਾਵਤ ਹੈ, ਜਦੋਂ ਖੁੱਲਦਾ ਡੁੱਲਦਾ ਖੂਨ ਸ਼ਹੀਦਾਂ ਦਾ ਤਕਦੀਰ ਬਦਲਦੀ ਕੌਮਾਂ ਦੀ, ਐਂਡ ਇਟਸ ਵੈਰੀ ਰਾਈਟ ਹੈ ਨਾ। ਜਿੰਨੀਆਂ ਵੀ ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀਆਂ ਹੁਣ ਹੋਈਆਂ ਨੇ ਇਹ ਅਜਾਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਾਣੀਆਂ, they were for a cause and that cause will be met one day, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਕਿਰਪਾ। But then what we need to do until that cause has been met is to educate people. The main reason why we wanted to bring Guruship period into this talk for 1984 is that people don't understand that the narrative that has been out on the market is like this was a conflict between the personalities, this is a conflict, this is a political conflict. No, it's not. It's a conflict. It's a proper conflict of Dharam. You know what?
It's Gurmat worldview versus every other worldview. So that's how we understand like everything. That's how we understand what you are, what I am. Like how do we understand ourselves? We can't do that without Gurbani. We can't understand कि दुनिया च रहना किद्दां, बहना किद्दां, उठना किद्दां. Like what you know what the so-called democratic countries are learning today is that you should treat people nicely. ਉਹ ਤਾਂ 500-600 ਸਾਲ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਹੀ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ ਸਿਖਾਤਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿ ਪਹਿਲੇ ਸਿੱਖਿਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਓੰਕਾਰ, you know, ਕਿ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਝ ਪਰਮਾਤਮਾ ਦਾ ਰੂਪ ਹੈ, right? Like ਇੱਕ ਆ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਝ. And like if for us it is literally a conflict ਕਿ we have a way to live, to understand the world, to give something to the world, and for people to live in harmony with each other and with the Creator's creation. That is both, right? It's not just living ਕਿ ਮੈਂ you know ਮੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਦੇ you know ਭਾਈ ਨੂੰ ਤੰਗ ਨਾ ਕਰਾਂ, but I should live in harmony with ਕੁਦਰਤ, ਕਿ ਕੁਦਰਤ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਪਾਲਦੀ ਆ, ਅਸੀਂ ਕੁਦਰਤ ਨੂੰ ਪਾਲਦੇ।
And that can't exist just in your mind. But there needs to be territory for that, right? And Bhai, on the land.
Bhai asked about like to take it to Guru Gobind Singh Ji's Maharaj period. Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji Maharaj is Shaheed. Guru Gobind Singh Ji's time, their majority of their battles are fought against the Pahadi Raja, hai na? When they move into Anandpur Sahib, Rola ye hai, the Pahadi Raja like, who are you to move here? Right? This is we're protected by the Mughal state. Essentially, we're propped up. Like principalities of the Mughal state. ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕੌਣ ਹੁੰਦੇ, ਅਸੀਂ with a high class Rajputs, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਰਹਿ ਸਕਦੇ, right? And then that ਲੜਾਈ ਝਗੜਾ then manifests itself into the Battle of Mangani eventually. And even after defeating them, and this is just is funny, even after defeating them, ਜਦੋਂ ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤ ਸੰਚਾਰ ਹੁੰਦਾ, then still there's a solar of, do you know what, actually, you know that hedging bets, they've got hedge bets as well, innit? They're not in charge. They're just propped up in charge. And they don't turn on them. So they decided, but shall we hedge bets? Maybe Guru Gobind Singh Ji is onto something. And they say, wait, what if we do this Amrit business? Yeah, can we share this? And then there, the Guru Gobind Singh Ji keeps a shart, right? That we thonu saryan de naal shakna paina. Right? They said they will have a. So after being, because Guru Gobind Singh Ji's whole, that's the whole thing, right? Is time in Anandpur Sahib, their diplomacy even at the wedding when they make them go around the long way. Then Guru Gobind Singh Ji sends the most expensive gift as well, just to let them know, innit? Like we've got all options are available. Okay, we win nobody. And in jealousy, everyone stares at the couple's most expensive gift delivered by Daya Singh. On behalf of Guru Gobind Singh Ji, है ना? तो पहला तो उन्होंने इन्हें तंग किया कि दूर जाओ. Then Guru Gobind Singh Ji ने ये भी किया ना. So this is Guru Sahib's vanguard, which we're talking about, challenging that we can compete at any level and with under any circumstance. But what's interesting is that shart is put कि भी तुसी आ भी सकते हैं, because ultimately Guru Bakshan हारिया, है ना? But the shart is there that you have to exist like this. In our structure, in our way of life. Then that's fine. And then they, of course, flip-flopped. History is full of these kind of characters that are kind of like a bit loyal at times and then not. And then I think we're going to explore 84 and we're going to find
the Siddhantic position there is so important as well, because, like making that political alliance with the Hindu Rajputs, the Hill Rajas, would have been really good. In terms of numbers and stuff. But we can't compromise, innit, on like the Siddhant, because otherwise we don't have any. We're the same as them.
And plus, one interesting irony is that some of their Raje were the ones jede Guru Har Gobind Sahib Pasha chhada ke liaye si 52 Raje. And I mean, akrit kanta di is to vaddi misal hor ki hoegi, je ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਬਾਬਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਗੁਰੂ ਛੁਡਾ ਕੇ ਲਿਆਇਆ ਤਾਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਲੜਦੇ ਹੋ. I mean, that is where the materialism and Sikhi comes in contrast, ਹੈ ਨਾ? ਕਿ ਇਹ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਭਗਤਾਂ ਤੇ ਸਹਿਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਜੋੜ ਕਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਏ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੋਵਾਂ ਦੀ ਕਦੀ ਨਿਭਣੀ ਨਹੀਂ, ਕਦੀ ਬਣਨੀ ਨਹੀਂ, ਚਾਹੇ ਜੋ ਮਰਜ਼ੀ ਹੋ ਜਾਏ. ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹ ਦੀ ਖੁਸ਼ੀ ਭਾਲ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ, ਦੂਸਰੇ ਮਟੀਰੀਅਲਿਜ਼ਮ ਭਾਲ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ, you will never be able to go along.
And we'll see that. We're going to go through 84, right? And we're going to talk about key figures, Bhai Singh Santaji, etc., right? And it's that same ideology that was in the Guru, and we'll see that like come out of Sikhs. So like, this bit here when Guru Gobind Singh Ji, you're right, it probably would have been a good move, innit? Like just lock off that area around Anandpur Sahib, right? And then you could probably have like a semi-autonomous thing that could probably coexist with the Mughal. It makes sense, and but Guru Sahib ne sanu sikhana si, they're going to sanu sikhana si, and you'll see that with Santaji again and again. There's times where Santaji, even in some of the interviews, when the Swami comes to me, I'm saying, of course they know what they're planning, of course they know what's going to allude to, but sanu dasana si ki vi e baadshai ede bichu hi honi hai, right? Not that sort of way, so we'll see that, innit? We'll see like the chalka of the way the Guru Sahibs behaved in the Majude Samede Shahid Singh, Santaji, Bhai Singh, etc. We'll see that when we discuss their Jeevan in more detail.
Well, we spoke about 239 years of Itihas from Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj up to Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj, 1708. We've still got a long way to go to get to the 20th century. So, the Misro period you touched upon as well, and then you talked a bit about Maharaj and Ranjit Singh's period. So where are we going now in terms of after 1708, with all the systems that are being made? How is the Panth moving forward from that moment on? Where do you want to pick it up from?
I think we can start initially from, when the Britishers came in after the Mughal period. So we've had our Raj for a long time. And then the Maharaja Ranjit Singh's demise and the Dogriyan, the Gaddari with the Panth. And I mean, it bites me to the core by saying this, but then ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਜੇ ਸਿੱਖ ਨੂੰ ਨਾ ਮਾਰੇ ਸਿੱਖ ਕਦੇ ਨਾ ਹਾਰੇ is this ਪੁਰਾਣੀ saying, ਹੈ ਨਾ? ਕੁਝ ਸਿੱਖ ਹੈਗੇ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਮਟੀਰੀਅਲਿਜ਼ਮ ਨੂੰ they bow down to it, and this is even now happening. If all the ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ, forget India, ਜੇ diaspora ਚ ਵੀ ਸਾਰੇ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਹੋ ਜਾਣ ਨਾ, I mean, Khalistan is not very, it's not a very difficult task to achieve. But I think it's our MaanSikh Gulami, and it's the narratives of the other states that we are adopting is what's causing a delay.
What do you mean by MaanSikh Gulami? Just to explain that.
MaanSikh Gulami is like, you know, I mean, Deep Sidhu used to mention this a lot. Is like, Darbar Sahib te hamla hoya, and then we think ki je Sant ji uthe na hunde hamla nahi si hona.
Anji.
This is MaanSikh Gulami. Genocide ਹੁੰਦਾ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਤੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸੋਚਦੇ ਹੋ ਕਿ ਜੇ ਇੰਦਰਾ ਗਾਂਧੀ ਨਾ ਮਰਦੀ ਤਾਂ genocide ਨਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ. This is MaanSikh Gulami. They had the model of Darbar Sahib years ago, and they were planning the attack years ago before even Sant ji got there, right? And the other thing was when we say Sant ji ਉੱਥੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਤਾਂ attack ਹੋਇਆ, but then ਦੂਸਰੇ 49 ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਿਆਂ ਤੇ ਕਿਉਂ attack ਹੋਇਆ same day ਤੇ, ਹੈ ਨਾ? And when we say Sikh genocide ਹੋਇਆ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇੰਦਰਾ ਗਾਂਧੀ ਮਰੀ, Operation Shanti was planned years ago, just after they were basically trying to trigger it around 86 originally. The plan was to have a false flag operation near the Pakistan-India border. And they will say ki dekhya Sikh jede ne, they have colluded with the Pakistanis, and then we will start the ethnic cleansing. That was the operation. In the death of Indira Gandhi just triggered it a bit early, you know. And I mean, we need to understand, sanu apna dimag clear karna pena hai. And that's what Sant ji knew what was going to happen. ਉਹ ਸਿਆਣੇ ਸੀਗੇ, ਰੱਬ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜੇ ਹੋਏ ਸੀ. He knew. All the Shaheed Singhs knew what's going to happen. Like in 78, we're going to talk about 78, but they said, ਠੀਕ ਹੈ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਦੇਖ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਾਨੂੰਨ ਕੀ ਕਰਦਾ ਸਾਡੇ ਲਈ. ਜੇ ਕਾਨੂੰਨ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੁਛ ਕਰੂਗਾ ਫਿਰ ਦੇਖਾਂਗੇ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੀ ਕਰਨਾ. ਸੋ ਮਤਲਬ ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਭ ਕੁਛ ਪਤਾ ਸੀਗਾ. They just wanted us to realize that this is the way. This is where it's going to happen. They will go up to any extent. I'll give you an example. You know, there was some, I mean, according to their terminology, some Islamic terrorists were in Akshardham Mandir in 2009, I think. You tell me, did they attack that mandir with topa? Did they attack that mandir with guns? No. Unhone wo bande fade, bahar kadde. That's it, not even a single scratch.
Talking about MaanSikh Gulami as well, I think that's one thing, the Majuda Sangharsh, like the Shaheeds, that's what they talk about Sant Ji and stuff, that they reinstill this spirit within the Sikh, like this confidence. Sometimes looking back at like Itihas, like we can't even understand that kind of thought process. Like, wasn't it after one of the Vadde Kalukare that is written, I think in Panth Prakash, that the response of the Sikh was the ones that died were the weak ones. Khalsa are still here.
Yeah.
So it's like we can't even imagine that kind of thought process.
And that mentality is instilled Guru Sahib's time. When Guru Sahib's Amrita Bhatta Tyar Hunda, Kaam Hamara Tolan Takadi, that we're just no more shopkeepers, we just weigh things out. And that Nangi Tegna Hamse Pakadi, we've never even held an unsaved sword before. So this business is completely new to us. Chidiyan se hum dar jaun. The flapping of birds frighten us. And you know, and Guru Gobind Singh Ji eventually goes on to say, Chidiyan se main baaj udaun, hai na? That I'll make you the fighting force, the downtrodden, the neglected. And ohi mainu lagda bhi jidna Baljit Singh kande, maybe that mentality is kind of come back into us, and it's always going to creep back into us unless these inspirational events do not happen. And of course we will try to we will try to counter the narrative by giving kind of like a breakdown of facts and stuff like that. But all the time it's kind of this self-blaming, self-victimizing prophecy.
Like even during 70, another one to talk about this a bit later, but it just reminded me that on the 14th of April, the day after the Sakka, right, after the Teran Singh Shaheed hoya, Sant Ji goes to the Bhog of the Renspai that happened through the night from the 13th to the 14th. He goes to Manji Sahib. And so the Renspai has been going on, and it's during this Renspai that they're finding out that Kinne Singh Shaheed hoya. They didn't even know at this point. So as the Renspai is going on, they're announcing, like, you know, the names of the Shaheed, that there's been another Singh, or the Shaheed hoya. And Sant Ji speaks at this Renspai, the Bhog of the Renspai, and he says, and I couldn't imagine, like, you know, someone saying this today, right? He says at the Bhog, right? He says, because at this time they didn't even know that they didn't have the full count. And Sant Ji said, "Je 5-7 Singh ਜੱਥਿਆਂ ਚੋਂ 2 ਜੱਥਿਆਂ ਚੋਂ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਹੋਏ ਆ ਤੇ ਕੋਈ ਵੱਡੀ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ." ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਗੁਰੂਆਂ ਦੇ ਸਮੇਂ 'ਚ ਲੱਖਾਂ ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਨੇ ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀਆਂ ਦਿੱਤੀਆਂ ਸੀ to, like, you know, just for Maharaj, but, like, you know, Maharaj ਕਿਰਪਾ ਕਰਕੇ, for Maharaj is, like, you know, for Sikhi to flourish, right? So just for Maharaj is like khushi, right? ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਨੇ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਖਾਸ ਕੇ ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀਆਂ ਪਾਈਆਂ ਲੱਖਾਂ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ. So you can imagine that when we say that, like, that those Singhs and Singhniya brought that spirit back. Like Sant Ji's saying after a brutal massacre, like, koi baddi gal nahi. Like, and they looked at it as an opportunity. Sant ji ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੀ ਪਰ like ਇਸ ਸਮਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਹੋਇਆ ਸੀ, he goes, this is not going to be the end of this, but this ਜਿਹੜੀ cycle of ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀs ਇਹ ਹੁਣ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਹੋਇਆ ਹੈ, ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਕਿਰਪਾ ਕਰਨ how far this is going to go, but don't take this as that and he said it by himself as well, but ਹੁਣ like he goes ਮੇਰਾ ਵੀ ਸਮਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਐਸੀ ਜਿੰਦਾ ਦੌਰ ਚੱਲਣਾ.
I think what Bhaji is saying is like, you know, the Shahidi, for other people it'll be like you know, a time of remorse, but for Sikhi it's a time of celebration. We say murda hoye murid soye ko virla gur gor samave. It's somebody bade exceptional hunde ne jinu guru di kabar naseeb hundi hai. That's what the literal meaning is. So jehdi eh MaanSikh Gulami di, just coming back to that point, the MaanSikh Gulami is, if I have to challenge that concept of MaanSikh Gulami, I'll go to Guru Gobind Singh Ji's period, and when jadon Sahibzade shaheed ho jande ne, some people do come to Guru Sahib in the Machiwada and says, Guru Sahib ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਸਾਹਿਬਜ਼ਾਦੇ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਹੋ ਗਏ ਨੇ, ਅਕਾਲ ਤਖਤ ਸੌਰੀ ਅਨੰਦਪੁਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਅਬੈਂਡਨ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ, ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਸਾਰਾ ਖਜ਼ਾਨਾ ਲੁੱਟ ਗਿਆ, ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਈਵਨ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਤੇ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹ ਸਰਸਾ ਨਦੀ 'ਚ ਬਹਿ ਗਿਆ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਹੁਣ ਹਾਰ ਮੰਨ ਲਓ. ਐਂਡ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਸੇਜ਼ ਨਾ ਸਾਜ਼ੋ ਨਾ ਬਾਜ਼ੋ ਨਾ ਫੌਜ਼ੋ ਨਾ ਫਰਸ਼, ਖੁਦਾਵੰਦ ਬਖਸ਼ਣ ਦੇ ਐਸ਼ ਅਰਸ਼, ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਖੁਦਾ ਮੇਰੇ ਦਿਲ 'ਚ ਬੈਠਾ ਮੈਂ ਉਹਦੀ ਬਖਸ਼ਿਸ਼ 'ਤੇ ਜੀਣਾ. ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਸੀ ਇਹ ਮਟੀਰੀਅਲ ਇਹ ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਦੁਬਾਰਾ ਫਿਰ ਕ੍ਰੀਏਟ ਕਰ ਲੈਣਾ, ਕਰ ਵੀ ਲਿਆ, ਹਜੂਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ 'ਚ ਦੁਬਾਰਾ ਕ੍ਰੀਏਟ ਕਰ ਲਿਆ, ਅਬਚਲ ਨਗਰ ਵਸਾ ਲਿਆ. ਸੋ ਕਹਿਣ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਹੁਣ ਅੱਜ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਨਹੀਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਐਡੀ ਵੱਡੀ ਤਾਕਤ ਨਾਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੜ ਸਕਦੇ, ਇਹ ਤਾਂ ਨਿਊਕਲੀਅਰ ਪਾਵਰ ਹੈ ਨਾ, ਵੀ ਆਲਵੇਜ਼ ਹੇਅਰ ਦੀਸ ਕਾਈਂਡ ਆਫ ਥਿੰਗਸ, ਬਟ ਸਿੰਘਸ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਿੰਘ ਗੁਰੂ ਨੂੰ ਪਰਥਾਏ ਹੋਏ ਨੇ, ਦੇ ਡੋਂਟ ਸੀ ਐਨੀਥਿੰਗ ਐਲਸ. ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਵੱਡੀ ਤਾਕਤ ਅਕਾਲ ਪੁਰਖ ਦੀ ਹੈ, ਅਸੀਂ ਅਕਾਲ ਪੁਰਖ ਨੂੰ ਪਰਨਾਏ ਹੋਏ ਹਾਂ. ਡਜ਼ ਨਾਟ ਮੈਟਰ ਚਾਹੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਕਿੰਨੇ ਲਾਈਫ ਟਾਈਮ ਲੱਗ ਜਾਣ. ਮੈਂ ਇੱਕ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦਾ ਸੀ, ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ 13 ਪੀੜ੍ਹੀਆਂ ਤੱਕ ਨਹੀਂ ਬਣਨਾ, ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਫਿਰ ਕੀ ਹੋਇਆ 14ਵੀਂ 'ਚ ਬਣ ਜਾਊਗਾ. ਸੋ ਯੂ ਨੋ ਦੈਟ ਇਜ਼ ਦ ਸਪਿਰਿਟ ਦੇ ਹੈਵ. ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਨਹੀਂ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸਿੱਖ ਨੂੰ ਮੰਜ਼ਿਲ 'ਚ ਇੰਟਰਸਟ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ, ਸਿੱਖ ਨੂੰ ਰਸਤੇ 'ਚ ਇੰਟਰਸਟ ਹੈ. ਇਹ ਪੰਥ ਹੈ, ਪੰਥ ਦਾ ਮਤਲਬ ਹੈ ਰਸਤਾ, ਅਸੀਂ ਇਸ ਰਸਤੇ 'ਤੇ ਤੁਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੇ ਕੁਛ ਵੀ ਹੋ ਜਾਏ, ਡਜ਼ ਨਾਟ ਮੈਟਰ. ਇਹ ਮਾਨਸਿਕ ਗੁਲਾਮੀ, ਇਹਦੇ 'ਚੋਂ ਬਾਹਰ ਨਿਕਲਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ. ਜਦੋਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਮੰਜ਼ਿਲ 'ਤੇ ਅੱਖ ਰੱਖਦੇ ਹੋ ਨਾ, then you start thinking about the pros and cons, then you start thinking about profit and loss. This is not business. Sangarsh is not business. Sangarsh is jab hum sharan prabhu ki aayi, raakh prabhu paave maar. ਕੋਈ ਫਰਕ ਨਹੀਂ ਪੈਣਾ, ਬਸ ਮੈਂ ਤੇਰੀ ਸ਼ਰਨ 'ਚ ਰਹਿਣਾ, ਤੇਰੇ ਚਰਨਾਂ 'ਚ ਰਹਿਣਾ, ਮੈਨੂੰ ਕੋਈ ਫਰਕ ਨਹੀਂ ਪੈਂਦਾ.
ਭਾਈ ਗੁਰਦਾਸ ਜੀ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਦੇ ਗੁਰਮੁਖ ਗਾਡੀ ਰਾਹ ਚਲਾਉਂਦਾ, right? Like Gurmukh is the one who walks the established path, and that Gadi Ra has always been this Ra of the Sangarsh, of that Bikra Penda, of Shahadat and Guru's Khushi ultimately, because that's what the Sikh is fighting for. ਇਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਰਾਜ ਕਾਇਮ ਕਰਨਾ ਜਾਂ ਜੋ ਵੀ ਹੋ ਜਾਵੇ, ਅਸੀਂ ਗੁਰੂ ਦੀ ਖੁਸ਼ੀ ਪ੍ਰਾਪਤ ਕਰਨੀ ਆ by living and fighting and dying, whatever it is, in that way ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਤਿਗੁਰੂ ਨੂੰ ਪਾਉਂਦਾ ਹੋਵੇ. That's in Guru Sahib's hukam, in according to their teachings, according to their guidance. And Shahidi is a part of that, because ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਗੁਰੂ ਦੀ ਖੁਸ਼ੀ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਆ, and it's a way of doing things in the world. Because, you know, people say, oh, like you can change, you know, you'll hear that today, right? You can change a system by being part of it. And they present that as a method or as a tactic or as a strategy. In the same way, Shahadat is a method, it's a tactic, it's a strategy, if you want to understand it on a dunyavi sense. But, you know, we give it less prominence than the dunyavi things. But Shahadat is something, you know, like Jaswant Singh Kalra once said, is the greatest gift Guru Sahib can give. So Guru di sab to vaddi daat hai. That's how Sikhs have always seen it. And they've always had that cha ke asi Guru de charna de vich asi balehar ho jaiye. Like let's become a sacrifice. There's so much, you know, that teaches us that ke asi Guru de charna de vich let's become a sacrifice. So we can walk on this path. And we don't want anything else. ਕੋਈ ਸਾਡੀ ਮਨ ਦੀ ਇੱਛਾ ਨਹੀਂ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਹੀ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਕਿ ਸ਼ਸਤਰਨ ਕੇ ਅਧੀਨ ਅਸੀਂ ਸ਼ਸਤਰਨ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਅਸੀਂ ਜੂਝ ਕੇ ਮੈਦਾਨੇ ਜੰਗ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸ਼ਹਾਦਤ ਪ੍ਰਾਪਤ ਕਰੀਏ, ਕਿ ਸਾਡੀ ਇਹ ਮਨ ਦੀ ਇੱਛਾ ਆ, right? And it's always been that way. And
you know, Khushi of Guru Sahib, like even Bhai Fauja Singh Shahidi, that's how Sant Ji describes it. He describes like Bhai Sahib Shahidi and says that, and after like taking bullets, you know, then like Bhai Sahib jidda kende si jidda Guru Kalgita ji de godi ch beh gaye. Like that's how we see Shahidi.
ਸ਼ਸਤਰਨ ਕੇ ਸਾਥ ਅਸੀਂ ਰਨ ਭੂਮੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਈਏ. And it's always been that ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਦੁਸ਼ਮਣ ਨੂੰ ਵੰਗਾਰਨਾ by entering into the battlefield. And that's not, like we say, it's not a mental battlefield. Or some people will take, parts of Chaupe Sahib and say, it's talking about like a mental battle against like all that kind of stuff. But it talks about the Kharga Khet. It talks about the actual battlefield. Run, like run means the battlefield, right?
Battlefield, that MaanSikh one is an ongoing thing, है ना? And ਉਹ ਵੀ ਜਿਤਨੀ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਹੈ ਸਿੱਖ ਵਾਸਤੇ, ਪਰ ਦੂਜੇ ਪਾਸੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹਦਾ practical aspect, that's what annoys me a lot, है ना? In Gurdwara, we talk all about history. But, who's going to talk about the present? I'm sorry to say, but we are talking about the shaheeds from the Guruship period and afterwards. But why don't we talk that freely about the shaheeds of the recent Sangharsh, ਉੱਥੇ ਆ ਕੇ ਕਈਆਂ ਦਾ ਜ਼ਬਾਨ ਬੰਦ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੈ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਵੀ ਰੀਜ਼ਨ ਸੇਮ ਸੀਗਾ। ਸੋ ਕਹਿਣ ਤੋਂ ਭਾਵ ਇਹ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਮਾਨਸਿਕ ਗੁਲਾਮੀ ਜਿਹਦੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਉਹ ਇਹੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਦੂਸਰਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਨੈਰੇਟਿਵਸ 'ਚ ਪੈ ਕੇ, ਸੋ ਵੈਨ ਯੂ ਸੈਡ ਕਿ ਵਾਟਸ ਨੈਕਸਟ, ਆਈ ਥਿੰਕ ਕਲੋਨੀਅਲਿਜ਼ਮ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਜਦੋਂ ਗੋਰੇ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਆ ਸਾਡੇ 'ਤੇ ਰਾਜ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ, ਉਦੋਂ ਕੀ ਹੁੰਦਾ? ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲੀ ਤਾਂ ਗੱਲ ਇਹ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਪੰਜਾਬ, ਇਫ ਯੂ ਸੀ that was an sovereign independent kingdom, and that was the last Raj to be annexed by the East India Company into the British kingdom.
What year are we talking about right now, roughly?
I think it's about 18...
So Punjab is annexed. So when the Angrez, so what you got to understand is like the Angrez, the English, they went all over the world during that 18th century period. And they went all over the world because they had a justification from Christianity, from the Bible. They had dictates from the church, from the Pope, that wherever you go, you discover new land, and ਉੱਥੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜੋ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਲੱਭਿਆ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਰਾ in the name of their God, the Christian God, that you can take it. And they had a decree called terra nullius, and that decree meant that this land that we go in, territory nullius is nothing. So this land is nothing in it, and that includes the people or whatever. And whatever we discover under the decree of the Pope, it becomes sadda ho janda, sara si kabja kar liya. So they were doing this for a really long time, and as a result of these colonization efforts, they were discovering places where people already lived. Like, they went to Africa and they're like, oh, we discovered Africa. Everything. And then because colonialism was also tied, colonialism best understood, like these words, right? Like colonialism, annexation, partition, etc., or law, they mean nothing. They're made up words. Colonialism, the real meaning of that is the science of exploitation. Annexation and partition is turning the exploited, dominated territories and bringing them under your legal authority. So that's what annexation means and partition means. So you go from being an occupying military force to being the legal occupier now. So now you're creating layers and layers. So colonization is a system. It's not a historic event that happens in the past. So when they come to Punjab, they very easily, as Vijay said, they take over most of the rest of South Asia. When they come to Punjab, you got to understand, colonial administrators were educated in churches. That's where the education system came from. So they're educated in churches, and they're like reading stories of like Samson and Delilah. Samson got his strength from his hair and all this kind of stuff, right? And they come to Punjab, and ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਬੱਚੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ ਤੋਂ ਸਾਖੀਆਂ ਸੁਣਾਉਂਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ, ਉਹ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਅੱਖੀ ਦੇਖਿਆ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, like ਸੂਰ ਮੇ ਕੇਸ ਰੱਖੇ ਹੋਏ, like ਸ਼ਸਤਰ ਇਦਾਂ ਰੱਖੇ ਹੋਏ. And it was very difficult for them to take over Punjab, because Punjab was a fully militarized society. Like, it wasn't like, the rest of South Asia, the Brahmins and the Rajputs and the Kshatriyas, Kshatriya and the Vas. And, it was a very stratified, very divided society. Power was concentrated at the top. Punjab was Hanne Miri. Like, they had fought against the Mughals. They had fought against Abdali. They had completely decimated every invading force. Another history that's also told to us, which isn't our history, is that we have no power, that, Punjab wouldn't be successful as an independent country. But if you look at the history of South Asia, Punjab has been the only entity that's destroyed every invading power, whether it's the Mughal Raj, which it was the largest contiguous land empire in the history of the world. It was massive. Punjab uproots and destroys the Mughal Raj. Then the Angrez, who, they say the sun doesn't set on their empire. Punjab destroys, the power of the colonial empire in Punjab. In South Asia. And today, the Hindustani government, a farmer protest, which wasn't even for autonomy, which wasn't even for sovereignty, it was just for like legal rights, completely shakes the foundations of like Delhi. And even before that, the 80s and the 90s, that completely shakes the foundations of the India's belief in its own military strength. But yeah, so colonization is a structure that was built on top of us. And it's a lot of history to cover. We're talking 1849 to essentially 1947, a 100-year period that we haven't really, it hasn't really become part of mainstream Panthic discourse. And if it was, it would make us reframe how we think about a lot of things, including in particular like the law, right? Like I think today, as we're going on, Sikhs have more and more fascination with law and like international community and international order, and all these kind of words are thrown about. But the clearest example of where you can see that this stuff means nothing is like what's happening in Palestine, you know, with this whole idea of international law, international order, humanitarian aid is completely failed. Whatever you think of, you know, the conflict between, you know, the Palestine struggling for its sovereignty and Israel, you know, occupying them and genociding them, whatever you think about that, you know, the humanitarian crisis is there in front of you, you know, but all of that, you know, that system, it means nothing, right? You can see it in Kashmir, you know, the United Nations calling for, you know, referendum there. You can see it in other places that have formerly been colonized that haven't got their autonomy. Technically, according to this international order, India is a decolonized territory right now, but Punjab's never been part of that. So in that 100-year period, everything that we've talked about before, our institutions, our Gurukar, our autonomy, everything was completely first studied. Remember, like Max Arthur Macauliffe, when he's asking Ratan Singh Pangu, they're studying us because the anthropologist is a colonial officer. They have a role that in that system to study those people. They made maps. They said, oh, here are the Sikhs, here are the Rajputs. They counted us because they're fascinated with counting and categorization. They studied us intensely, and then bit by bit, they demolished everything. And they created alternatives in its place. So when you see, you know, the Royal Geographic Society creating maps of Amritsar, after the period of, you know, where they've taken over Punjab and they've legally like annexed it, you see like Amritsar is like a fortified city, Gobindgarh, which is the fortress where the Tokskhana was, and you see the new structures that the colonizers building. And these new structures today have become part of, as Veerji saying, like this mental subjugation. For us, they've become common sense. So we can't imagine a society, many of us, without these structures. So those structures are the railway, the post office, the colonial school, which was first the missionary school, the boys' orphanage, the girl orphanage, the police station, the military encampment, the jail. They build new jails, right? So they're building all of this infrastructure in order to continually subjugate you, the police lines, all of this stuff. And the reason why they're building like orphanages, like why do you think they're building girls and boy orphanages? They're fighting against their parents. Their kids are becoming orphans, so they're going to put their kids into orphanages so they can indoctrinate them. This exact same model that they did with residential schools in Canada. These were called residential schools. And what did they do to the indigenous people there? They took them, they cut their case, they put them in a pent coat, forced them to speak English, shittar marya, tortured them. They'd put certain priests in those schools that they knew that were, you know, that were malicious in that way, that would abuse children. They'd move them around, and all of this was systematic because you see the patterns everywhere that the Angraj went, and you see the same pattern in the 80s, 90s, where the school is turned into the torture center. Because, you know, when you run out of the jail space, you got to put people somewhere. So they start using schools as torture center because the school's always been a method of them controlling us. The same thing they do with the Mau Mau in Kenya, where they turn the school into a torture center, where they turn it into a place to put people into prison. So from 1849 to 1947, the autonomous existence of the Khalsa is systematically encroached upon and destroyed. And on one hand, you have from 1845, you know, like all the way up to like, you know, 1947, like Sikhs aren't passively receiving multiple agitations like the Anglo-Sikh Wars by Maharaj Singh's rebellion, the Nirankari reform, the Singh Sabha, Gaddar Party, Sakkan and Kana Sahib, Jallianwala Bagh, Akali movement, and then Babbar Akali come because they think the Akali movement wasn't radical enough, Chabbiyan da Morcha, Jetto da Morcha, the refusal to sign the constitution. There's continuous agitations. So the 80s period is emerging from that history as their immediate history, not us looking at it as like a distant history. So they know that like the Jetto da Morcha begins because Maharaja Ripudaman Singh, who was favorable to Sikhs, was forced to abdicate by the Angraj, and so Sikhs started a morcha to get him back on his throne, and then they replaced the Granthi that was doing the Akhand part with their own Granthi, and because they continuously they wanted to interject in our connection to Sikhi. So following Maharaja Ranjit Singh's and Lahore Darbar's collapse, and it happens because there's a saying that's older than our sayings, which is karda peti lanka tave, right? Like the people that aren't familiar with the inner workings, they have more power to just demolish it. So Angrej knew that, so they gave lalacha, like they gave women, they gave liquor, like firearms, etc. They tried to bring certain individuals onto their side, and they were successful in that because some of them weren't this homme tyagi Gursikhs. Some of them were like, oh, when the Angrej win, sanu Kashmir mil juga, sanu aa mil juga. So they forgot about the Panth and the Qaum and Guru Sahib's Nishana. They thought of their Nij, their own self. They wanted to become a Raja. And so the Angrej were able to manipulate that and then, cause the Sardars to fight amongst themselves, and the Khalsa army, which was very difficult for them to control. They started spreading propaganda, ke ek goreyan de naal ral gaya, wo ral gaya. So then they would kill Sardars, and they caused internal turmoil. And once that Lahore Darbar, Ranjit Singh dies, multiple of his successors are then assassinated and killed. One of his successors is killed on the way back from a funeral from one of the previous people that were going to inherit the Raj, right? And then Dalip Singh, as a child, is then abducted and trafficked to the UK, because that's what it is. He isn't brought to the UK, and we can't celebrate him as like a citizen. He's literally, as a child, stolen from there, brought here, anglicized, and all of that. The Khalsa Fauj, what they do is they begin this narrative of recruitment. So they recruit the Khalsa Fauj into their army. And Shaheed Bhai Harmeet Singh wrote his master's thesis on this, on the causes and the effects of the falling of the Sikh Raj. And he says the reason why they recruited the Sikh army into the English army was because they wanted to reduce the risk of rebellion. Remember, because colonization is about exploitation, it's also about economically being profitable. So if you are sending soldiers from UK all the way to South Asia to rule over the natives, you look different. So they're gonna immediately be against you, and also it's very expensive. So it's easier and cheaper for them to raise troops from the area that they've conquered. And now the person who's pointing the gun at you looks like you and speaks your language.
More importantly, he's not pointing the gun at you anymore.
Yeah. So he's not pointing the gun at the Angrej, right? So the officer would stay the Angrej. You'll see the pictures. The same thing in World War I, World War II, which now today Sikhs have convinced themselves, or you even see in Gurdwara, Sikh history. That's not Sikh history. That's a history of our Gulami. And you'll see like Angrej officers standing, and the Sikh soldiers are standing behind them. Or the famous photo of the Maharaj Swaroop, and they're walking through the desert, and Sikhs are like, oh, look how much they respected Guru Granth Sahib Ji. Those photos were taken by military photographers because you couldn't take a photo on a battlefield. It was a punishable by death offense. They're all staged photographs. And you'll see that today, right? You'll see a Gora come into, or Prime Minister, or like a king or whatever. They'll come to the Gurdwara and they'll do Matha Tek in front of Guru Sahib, and Sikhs will be like, yo, jo bhi hega, they care about Guru. They don't care about Guru. They see us as a backwards people that bow down to a big book. That's what they see us as, and we haven't confronted that. And they've known from those days, when they studied us in those 18th century days, that if you show respect to the Guru Granth Sahib, Sikhs will do anything for you. And they actually issued Gurmukhi propaganda notices through like, when they took over Sikh institutions as well, and through their proxies, saying that, just as Guru Sahib is a Sache Pasha, the king or the queen of England is also Sache Pasha. Fighting for them and fighting for Guru Sahib is the same. Just as your Nishan Sahib represents truth and justice, and the English flag also represents the same thing. But the real history is the history of the Gaddar Party, and like Kartar Singh Sarabha was hung as a child, the Gaddar Party that recognized this, the Babbar Akalis that were like, there's only one way to fight them, but they had a very radical, very militant, very like anti-colonial policy.
The interesting as well, like you see through Sikh history, is that it's cyclical. So during the Babbar Akali lair, they were having the same ideological challenges with the community as the Majuda Sangharsh. So they were having to say, the Guru Hargobind Sahib ne bhi janga ladiyan si, like we're fighting against the British. Then like they were having to kind of like root that in like Sikh ideology as well, because obviously at the time the British had Granthis installed that were saying that it was a crime to fight against the British, that the Sikhs shouldn't. And even the I think the SGPC at the time were condemning the Babbar Akali.
Yeah, they were.
So the Sikh political leadership at the time was condemning or the soldier leadership was condemning the Babbar Akali, and the Babbar Akali were having to explain their actions through Guru Hargobind Sahib and Guru Gobind Singh Ji to say that Jado Maharaj Ji Shastra Chakke Sige, like, and they're trying to explain the same thing. So obviously sometimes we have to go through that same cycle again.
Just to wrap up on this point, like on one hand you had like the Morche and the Sangharsh that the Sikhs were fighting, this system of like destruction that destroyed our Bunge, that destroyed every educational institution we had. Like, you know, Virji was saying, like Punjab's literacy was like 90% plus. So-called developed countries don't have that level of literacy. Ranjit Singh had this Gurmukhi and like Farsi primer, like to increase literacy. It was called Qaeda-e-Noor.
Yeah.
And the Qaeda-e-Noor was like a small booklet, like we have a Bal Upadesh today, all this Saudi Cheez, right? It's a language booklet. That booklet was in every single household. He had very strict instructions on how this booklet would be given to the Sarpanch. The Sarpanch would then make the number of copies for the people in the village, then report back to the administrators that say, look, this is how many people there are in the village, this is how many copies we've made. There isn't a single surviving copy of the Qaeda-e-Noor today. And that document is in every single house. And they systematically destroyed everything that we had in order to bring us under their worldview. And it's formalized in 1947. So that 100-year period of where it's us versus them, we were fighting, at the same time, they were bringing in legislation and control, the Indian Penal Code, the Government of India Act. The Indian Penal Code comes in 1860, which is still the legal code today, the law, which is written in English by the Angrez. That's why sedition is a crime. They bring in the Government of India Act, the Rowlatt Act, the Gurdwaras Act in 1925, the Armed Forces Special Powers Act in like 1942. Then partition, again, is a legal instrument. So they have all of these legal methods. They bring out Himachal and Haryana through Reorganization Act. They bring in UAPA, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. All of these laws are designed to make your resistance illegal. So if you're first, like the Jallianwala Bagh, Sakkan and Kana Sahib happens because of Guru Ka Bagh Morcha. So Guru Ka Bagh is where Sikhs had been getting wood for the langar since Guru Hargobind Pasha's time. And then Angrez stopped that. So they start, peaceful protests at that point that we're going to go there. They carry on sending jathe. Those jathe get beaten up. They get few people die. And then the Sakkan and Kana Sahib happens later. So people that are involved in Guru Ka Bagh Morcha, they're arrested and they're sent far away. And that tactic of arresting people and sending far away, again, is a colonial tool. They used to do that to how Australia was made. They would send all of their criminals to Australia, like where Jaggi's cases are from like 9 different police stations, because they want you to go far away, to be like taken away from your community, to,
drain resources.
Drain your financial resources.
So isolate you.
Isolate you, right? So Sakkan and Kana Sahib is happening when there's a train that's leaving and that train is being sent to a prison far away, and the Sikhs sit on the train tracks in order to stop the train to give them langar, right? So you got these powerful methods of like resistance, and then you've got like these laws that are saying that, okay, this is how we're going to make this thing illegal that you did, this illegal, and we're going to make a law that says now we're going to take you from here to here. We're going to make a law that says resisting against the British is illegal. We're going to make a law for this, for that. Then you have the emergency, like, which comes later on. And you have the Disturbed Areas Special Courts Act. So now this area is a disturbed area, so we can have special court where the legal requirement is reduced now, so you don't have to present certain evidences. And you see that later on with Professor Devinder Pal Singh Puller, who's convicted on the basis of him putting his thumbprint on a blank piece of paper. That was his so-called confession. So all of this reverberates later on. It's the same structure that exists today in India. So you have legislation and control, and out of that, in order to confuse the position, ek paase ta morche lag rahe Nishan Sahib de thalle utte Sikh shaheed ho rahe hai. Jatto da morcha is famous Saki of Bibi Ji holding their bacha. The bacha gets shot. They put the bacha down and carry on walking in the morcha. And on one side, you've got legislation and control that says this is illegal now. We're going to send you to prison. By Maharaj Singh's time, they send him to Andaman Islands. Which is a small island, which is a penal colony. They put him in a 4x8 cell because they were so scared of him. He's 118 years old at the time or something. Didn't even let him out for a walk. And he died in that cell and he'd have to like defecate in a bucket, and they kept him in there for I don't know how many years.
He couldn't stand up in the cell.
Couldn't stand up, couldn't lie down properly. But it's that same practice. And then in between these two like extremes, they create the tactics they use to confuse us, to muddy the water. So you have the Indian National Congress, the World War I, World War II, where they recruit you, and and they institute this martial race narrative that Sikhs are a martial race, and now Sikhs themselves will say "Asi martial race," and they will say the Gurkhas are the martial race. Even today in Nepal, there's a whole generation of like Nepalis that grow up to go and join the British military.
Yeah,
And that's the only like the way that they've got to like earn some money and get out of Nepal, and they become the Gurkha regiment, and they're like, yeah, the Gurkha, like they're so strong, and whatever. So and they did that with many other races, but we were one of them, right? Like this martial race. So World War I happens, and they bring in the SGPC in like the 1920s, the Akali Dal in 1920s, and that's very important because the SGPC and the Akali Dal now do something that was never done before, which is separate Miri Piri. So you had the SGPC representing the Sikhs' religious things and the Akali Dal representing the Sikhs' political things. And those two were never separate. There was never a separation between the religious and the political. Our politics are informed by our Gurmat, and our Gurmat is informed by like our connection with what we see in reality, right? There's this symbiotic relationship between the two, and they're both manifest in the Khalsa as the entity that manifests religion and politics, right? Or the Jada Khalsa da Roop as the Guru Panth. And then the BJP comes in, the Akali Dal, all this kind of stuff that's happening. And that's what that's saying is you don't need to, become shaheed and fight and, resist and become, be tortured to death, be sent to prison. You can change this system by being part of this system. That's where all of that specifically originates. Because all these things aren't natural, right? Like, the things that we say, or the ideas that we have, or, where this conversation started around like MaanSikh Gulami, that mental subjugation of internalizing a history that isn't yours and looking at that history as something that is yours, it's a very deep trap. So, today, like, at that time, it was the fanatic Akali that was unruly, that was, couldn't be controlled. Then slowly that fanatic Akali became, and before that, during the Mughals period, it was like Sikh, they're dogs, they're uncivilized. Look at the Mughal Raj, it's civilized, right? And then it was the fanatic Akalis and, these under the British. And then it became like the radicals, then it became the extremists, and it became the terrorists. And they're all referring to the same type of Sikh. Akali Fulla Singh and Sant Janel Singh, unna ch fark koi nahi hega, koi kad ke dikha dve. But the Akali is, Fulla Singh is called the fanatic and Sant Janel Singh is called the terrorist, but they mean the same thing. Ke jere kise di gulami nahi sehna chaਹੁੰਦੇ. So that like period of like 1849 to 1947, that is when we become trapped within this, new system. And Sikhs, and following 1947, Sikhs are entering into a new world now, where the state is between you and Akal Purkh. Now you're living under the authority of the state. The state is this legal entity that has the right of determining who is a citizen, who is a human being, because citizenship is tied to humanity now. And I'll give you a good example of that. I don't know if you guys remember, a few years ago, there was a Sikh police officer in Texas who was killed during a traffic stop. I think his name was like Sandeep Singh, I think. And he was celebrated as a Sikh, and like he was celebrated in the Cathedral of Americanness, which is like a baseball stadium. They had a mad ceremony for him. All the, Polisia turned up, and they were like, look at this guy. Perfect example of what it means to be a Sikh today. At the same time, there's a 12-year-old Bibi Gurpreet Kaur that dies in the desert on the way into America because her mum left her there to go get some pani, and she was like a so-called illegal immigrant, right? And because she's illegal at that point, she's not a human being because she's not a citizen. So her death means nothing for us. It means nothing for America. And because our understanding is also coming from the state, like what is a human being, we adopt that same language, whether it's like the legal language, whether it's, discourses on like migration, like you'll see like in Canada, people say, oh, like a student aage, inhone bahut gand paata hai, and all that kind of stuff. That is all from the Angrez, and so we're caught in this like, skanjwa, we're caught in this trap where certain discourse, certain worldview, a particular economic system is become natural and common sense for us. And we can't imagine the alternative. And for me, that is like one of the biggest threats, because if when we तकरीबन सारे दे बच्चे are, right, and a lot of people that we're watching will have young kids that are kind of our age. If our children can't imagine what Khalsa Raj would look like, then who's controlling our future? If you ask a bachcha, say, what Khalsa Raj kidda da hoga, and they say, yeah, like, it'll have McDonald's, or it'll have like the best legal system in the world, and everyone will be rich, then who's dictating their imagination? Who's controlling their imagination?
It sounds like it's not about learning, it's about unlearning is what I'm kind of getting from you.
A big part of it, and like, the Angrej, there's this African writer, Novello Sodlobo, and he says colonization is the replacing of our memories with European memory. And you see that with like Sikhs, right, as well. Like you see this like whole like narrative. There's another writer called Amy Césaire, and he talks about how at the end of all of this so-called period, and like, while Gori are doing colonization, by the way, what they're telling themselves is called the Enlightenment period. Yeah, like, our power is increased, and like Amy Césaire talks about how at the end of all of this so-called Enlightenment period, the product of that is Hitler. And Hitler's only evil. Hitler represents all of the values of Europe, and he's only evil because he's doing to Europe what Europe did to the rest of the world. Because and when Hitler brought the concentration camp to Europe, then it became a problem. Because the concentration camp existed outside of Europe for a very long time. They were doing it. They were playing polo with the heads of like Aboriginal children in Africa. Like, enna jada inna ne zulm kita, like there's no covering it, there's no like denying it. And with the Sikhs, what they adopted was a strategy that they had been perfecting for a very long time. So when you see like partition occurring, Lahore and Amritsar, this Angrej were engaging with the Lahore Darbar because that's where the capital of Sikh Raaj was. There were treaties before. There was like the Lahore treaties, the Amritsar treaty. They were engaging with that Darbar, but when they drew the partition, all of a sudden they were like, "Oh, we hastily drew a line," and over here they strategically split those two spaces, and they were doing that in Africa, and they were doing that in all of the rest of the world for a very, very long time.
And I think they don't just split the place. What they did was they created a massive confusion.
They create something called ethnic conflict. So now you're fighting amongst yourselves.
There was a Red Cliff line that was basically made prominent everywhere else apart from Punjab and Kolkata, where Bangladesh was created and Pakistan was created this way. So the basic confusion that they created between Sikhs were, because the divide and rule thing, the most prominent policy they had from that time, they were trying to create this myth in Sikh mind कि जे तुसी इत्थों मुसलमान ना कड्डे ते हो सकदा अमृतसर Pakistan च चल जावे. And then they created another myth in Lahore ਦੇ ਬੰਦਿਆਂ ਚ ਕਿ ਇਤਰੋਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜੇ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਨਾ ਵੱਢਿਆ ਜਾਂ ਨਾ ਕੱਢਿਆ ਹੋ ਸਕਦਾ ਇਹ ਦੂਸਰੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆ ਜਾਵੇ. But before we even reach that, one thing that Bhai Shamsher Singh has mentioned, there is this strategy to create, infiltrate and dilute. So what they did was, there was a Gurdwara reform movement, because basically ਜਦੋਂ ਸਿੱਖ ਲੜਾਈ ਲੜ ਰਹੇ ਸਨ, ਬਹੁਤੇ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਮਹੰਤ ਕੰਟਰੋਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਸਨ. And then ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵਿਪਰਨ ਦੀ ਰੀਤ ਫੈਲ ਰਹੀ ਸੀ ਔਰ ਸਭ ਕੁਝ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ ਸੀ ਜੋ ਨਨਕਾਣਾ ਸਾਹਿਬ 'ਚ ਹੋਇਆ. But when Sikhs started Gurdwara reform movement, they actually kind of, converted that movement or diluted that movement and made that into an all Gurdwara Act in 1925. So SGPC was not as such a bad thing. It was basically Sikhs taking control of their Gurdwara according to the mool Sikhi Siddhant, because there were ਮੂਰਤੀਆਂ ਦਰਬਾਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ 'ਚ ਮੂਰਤੀਆਂ ਰੱਖ ਦਿੱਤੀਆਂ ਸਨ and all that thing, ਹੈ ਨਾ. ਬਹੁਤ ਕੁਛ ਹੋਇਆ. ਹਾਲੇ ਵੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜੇ ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨ ਜਾਓਗੇ, ਉੱਥੇ ਕਈ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਪੁਰਾਣੀਆਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੇਖੋਗੇ, ਉਹਦਾ ਤੇ ਮੀਨਾਕਾਰੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੋਈ ਹੈ, ਉਹਦੇ ਤੇ ਹਿੰਦੂਆਂ ਦੇ ਦੇਵੀ ਦੇਵਤਾ ਬਣੇ ਹੋਏ ਨੇ. And we've got nothing to do with it, we are against the murti puja and everything.
Graffiti.
But then that's what they used to do. So ਜਿਹੜੀ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਾ ਰਿਫਾਰਮ ਮੂਵਮੈਂਟ ਸੀ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਅੱਜ ਵੀ ਔਰ ਜੋ ਕੁਛ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਹਿ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਨਾ, this is just basically there been a power transfer between the Gore and then the Pure. But the system is exactly the same. They're still following the same policies. Just to before you touch on anything, I just want to complete this thing ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਜੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕੰਟਰੋਲ ਕਰਨਾ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਕੰਟਰੋਲ ਕਰਨਾ ਪੈਣਾ. ਔਰ ਹੁਣ ਮਹੰਤਾਂ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਡਾਇਰੈਕਟ ਅਲਾਈਅੰਸ ਸੀ. ਜਦੋਂ ਮਹੰਤ ਚਲੇ ਗਏ, then they wanted to have a formulated election system There is no election system in any other dharam apart from Sikh dharam, SGPC, which is a Shromani Gurdwara Prabandhak Committee. It's only to take care of the Prabandh of the Gurdwara, not to lead the Sikhs. And what they did was, Gurdwara Act banda hai, SGPC nu formulate kar dene, ude ch election system vaad dende ne, and you will be amazed ki jada Akaal Takht da jathedar hai, that is, according to the Indian law of the Gurdwara Act, is just basically a head priest of the Akaal Takht. So basically, it's a salaried person. Now, how can you imagine a stance like Akali Fulla Singh from now? You can't expect that, you know. It's just a salaried person. No matter how much we respect that authority, but that's how we get wrong hukamnames. ਉਧਰੋਂ ਜਰਨਲ ਡਾਇਰ ਨੂੰ ਸਰੋਪਾ ਮਿਲਦਾ ਹੈ ਨਾ, ਫਿਰ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਹੁਣ ਜੇ ਲੇਟੈਸਟ ਦੇਖੀਏ 100 ਦੇ ਸਾਧ ਨੂੰ ਮਾਫੀ ਮਿਲਦੀ ਹੈ. The system is not changed, ਹੈ ਨਾ. So they very cleverly infiltrated into your system and made your system westernized so that they can actually control it. ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਭਾਜੀ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ,
100%.
ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਹੁਣ SGPC ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਅੱਜ ਵੀ ਸਾਰੀ decision making ਹੈ 90% is through the executive body, which is just 9 to 8 elected members from the SGPC. They make 90% of the decision making. They can't have a meeting without informing the DC of Amritsar. It's according to the law.
And you know, even the DC of Amritsar, that's a colonial position that was created by the district commissioner. It was created by the colonized. You know, for me, the most important thing about the SGPC and the Akaali Dal, like regardless of its inner workings, because I don't think, you know, like if we have a conversation about its inner workings, we leave space for this conversation that the SGPC somehow could be reformed and it could be better. And it could be better and it could be reformed. And the problem is it's not functioning correctly.
The people are wrong.
Yeah, the people are wrong. Like for me, the problem is SGPC exists because of a government act that's under the Constitution of India, an act of the Parliament of India.
Yeah.
And that is a massive problem. How can your dharmic stand? And also, it's insulting because Sikhs have been living under the Indian state since 1947. Yeah, we've got relatives older than the Indian state. The Indian state is a recent entity. You know, like grandparents older born before 1947. We've been managing ourselves since 1469. The vast majority of our history, of our ityas, jira jonda jagdaya, is the Khalsa and the Sikh Panth, the foundation of Raj, Marya Sikha Jagat vich Nanak Nirmal Panth chalaya. This whole thing has been autonomously functioning and flourishing, whether it's in the form of Shahadat, whether it's in the form of Chak Nanaki or Goindwal Sahib or Amritsar Sahib being created, our Bolli being created, our Vidya being taught to us, you know, Shote Sahibzadi and Shahadat, like all of that, we've been flourishing and existing. And then following 1947, all of a sudden, we're not capable of running our institutions and we need like the oversight of the government. We need them to tell us and we need to learn from them something. Like we existed before them. We existed before the Angraj discovered us. We are flourishing. And since 1947, the only moment we can see of us flourishing is the moment that they tell us we were militant extremist terrorists and we deserve to die. And they had to send tanks into Darbar Sahib to save us from ourselves, apparently. And like I'll end it on this point, yeah. Because for me, this is like one of the, like a lot of this stuff is complicated. And it's taken me like a long time to like read this. And I've only learned the stuff that, you know, I've learned is because I love Khalistan. Like it's for me, it was like very simple. I love Khalistan. I want to learn about it. So it taught me other things. But for me, it's like really, really simple. You see photos of Sant Janel Singh and the Singhs during the 80s and there's kids running around. And like they were safe because that was the environment. And those things didn't kill our kids. Who killed our kids? Who like filled the Sarovar with Lashan, right? It wasn't us. So for me, it's very, very like clear what like the position is between us and them. And under their system, whatever they call it, like Mughal Raj, Angrejada Raj, Hindustani Raj, our future has always been safe in the hands of the Jujaru Khalsa, not in the hands of those that put on the vardiyan of whether it's the Ram Rai, whether it's, you know, Angrej di vardi, jo aj Hindustan di vardi koi palwe, is not the vardi of the Jalad, or like Sant Janel Singh called them Jamdoot, the ones that wear the vardi, like es tarti te de Jamdoot, right? Our Pavik's never been safe in their hands. And the only time our Pavik's been safe in the hands of the people that wear the Vardi is when they've betrayed the Vardi, whether it's General Subeg Singh, whether it's Beyant Singh and Satwan Singh. They did the thing that they were employed not to do, which was, you know, to look after and make sure the Prime Minister stays alive. They did the exact opposite of that. So ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਹਿਸਾਬ ਨਾਲ ਤਾਂ ਵਰਦੀ ਨੂੰ ਦਾਗ ਲਾਇਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ, right? And the hero of that vardi, according to the Indian state, is KPS Gill, super cop.
General
Right? General Bra, the hero of like that vardi. So ਉਹ vardi ਪਾ ਕੇ ਉਹ ਪੰਥ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਗਦਾਰੀ ਆ, and if you want to do gadari of that vardi, then you can do seva of the panth, as General Subheg Singh done very clearly. But yeah, for me it's like really black and white, like that pictures, when I see those pictures and I see those kids running around, like, you know, it's really serious, like pavak mahol, yeah, like, you know, it's a serious tense moment, and it's like a kid running around doing like a spastic pose in like the middle of like some serious picture, like Singh's running around with like banduka, and it's a kid just like, you know, freaking out. Some like,
it felt safe, right?
yeah, the kid felt completely safe, like bache daud rahe, bhaj rahe, khed rahe,
Even amongst weapons. And
yeah, in amongst this, you know, this so-called, you know, dangerous,
Weapons and
militant extremists. Bache aa rahe, loki aa rahe, like, you know, I remember one of my relatives told me they bought a tractor at that time, and they went to like Darbar Sahib. And like, Sant ji tractor le aaya, and he laughed and he was like, you know, hun tractor da sama nahi, hun hathyara da sama aaya. But like that was like the prem and the pyar that loki had, like they were like, Sant pargat hoye ya hun Darbar Sahib de utte, like, you know, like ashirwad len jaiye, like let's go get some blessings from like, you know, this big Sant that's there, right? People would come with like, oh mari muti dunyavi gal, oh ja kise ghar de vich jhagra ho gaya. And like that system at that time, SGPC was still there in the 80s. SGPC, Akali Dal was still there, but Sant ji completely makes them irrelevant, because jira pura nyao kare kartar wali gal ya, that was actually being witnessed in Akaal Takhat, because fir ek wari Sikh bichar rahe sige, and they were outside of the Veer ji said, outside of that state of MaanSikh Gulami, ek wari fir azad roop de vich ਵਿਚਰ ਰਹੇ ਸੀਗੇ, they were ਉਹ ਪ੍ਰਗਟ ਸੀਗੇ, ਉਹ ਯੋਧੇ, ਪਰਉਪਕਾਰੀ ਯੋਧੇ, ਉਹ ਪ੍ਰਗਟ ਹੋਏ ਸੰਗਤ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਹੀ ਪੈਦਾ ਹੋਏ, right? The ਸੰਗਤ produced like Sant Janel Singh, they didn't just come out of the sky, or like, you know, they weren't aliens that landed. ਉਹ ਪੈਦਾ ਹੋਏ ਸਾਡੇ ਸੰਗਤ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ, ਸਾਡੇ ਸਿਧਾਂਤਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ, like our tradition, out of the ਚੌਂਕਰਾ of like Sant ਗਿਆਨੀ ਗੁਰਬਚਨ ਸਿੰਘ, ਕਰਤਾਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਚੌਂਕਰੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਅਭਿਆਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਪੈਦਾ ਹੋਏ, that out of like Sant ji's ਚੌਂਕਰਾ like ਐਡਾ ਵੱਡਾ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਨਿਕਲਿਆ, because ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਝ ਉੱਦਾਂ ਹੀ ਆ. And that's one thing that, like, you know, for me is like, despite all of this stuff, this complication, this confusion, you know, MaanSikh Gulami, sara kuch udda hi pe aaya, and it's very clear. And like for me, it's not a question of like numbers, like, you know, if we have, you know, this many numbers, we had, you know, if we all united together, or this like mythical ekta that, you know, we talk about. For me, it's like what Bibi Bimal Kaur said, like ekta nishane de utte hundi hai. Jethun nishana tada spasht hai, then when your goal is clear, then you can have ekta, because you're going towards something. You're going towards a nishana. When your nishana is a Raj, then fir tusi Gulami kidda seh lunge.
I just wanted to like just hammer one point home to like smash this myth about working within the system, in particular reference to the SGPC. The SGPC controls obviously all the khajana of the Panth, all the Sikh institutions, all the Sikh Gurudharma and stuff in Punjab and in other states. For us to make any changes within the SGPC, if all the elected members, the executive committee that Paisa was talking about, they were all pro-Sikh, even if the Punjab government was like a pro-Sikh party, they would need a majority in the Indian Parliament to make a change.
To make a change to
the SGPC, because it's an act of Parliament.
Yeah.
So the SGPC, which they call the mini Sikh Parliament, for us to enact any change, if we didn't like anything, the way things are run, whatever, for us to make any change in that, we would need a majority in the Indian Parliament, not the Punjab Parliament, the Indian Parliament.
And why is that not possible?
Because we'd have to get all the states of India to also be pro-Sikh and vote in the same way.
Where
that's the illusion.
Population is about 2% in that country. So essentially, we have created a system within their system which is bound to fail, which will never advocate our feelings, you know.
And what should our system be? Prabandhit taur te. Guru Sahib's time, we have the Manji system. The Manji system later grows up and becomes corrupt. That same Manji system becomes corrupt, and then we know about Jede Mahant Sade si, hai na? Basant Jede Bane Baach. That's the Maharaj starts alluding to that in Guru Harkrishan Sahib's time. Guru Harkrishan Sahib is about to make their way to Delhi, as per Raja Jaya Singh Sadda, and the Masans are already plotting. Maharaj hasn't left yet, and they're already plotting if the Guru goes, so that same system technically created by Guru Sahib, ended by Guru Sahib, ended by Guru Gobind Singh Ji. We didn't need that anymore. And Masandala Khu, Anandpur Sahib. What happens after that? Anandpur Sahib then, ਜਦੋਂ ਘੇਰਾ ਪਿਆ ਤਾਂ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੇ ਛੱਡਿਆ. Maharaj leaves it to the Udasis. Maharaj does leave it on the Udasi there. Yeah, the Udasis are kind of protected from the persecution that the Khalsa is facing. Hence the Udasis Sam the Guru Kar. Unan di vi chalo deen ya, right? Later that system unequivocally it becomes in the case of Nankana Sahib Murtad, that becomes corrupted. है ना, ठीक है. पंथ ने फिर उन्होंने लाता कि actually, you know what, there was a time for you guys. है ना, you had to be the custodians of the sthans. You had to be the custodians because the Khalsa was being hunted down. But ਹੁਣ ਅਸੀਂ ਵਾਪਸ ਲੈਣਾ. And then thus this system is the Panth has the power to determine which way it wants to go. I know we don't need to we don't need to necessarily be put off anything either.
Be fixed
or be too fixated on anything. The Panth has the ability to determine its future and which way it wants to
go. Which is why in 1986 they abolished the SGPC.
We are ever evolving. I mean, Khalsa is all about evolving according to the time as well. ਤਾਈਓ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੇ ਇੱਕ ਗੱਦੀ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਨੂੰ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਪੰਥ ਨੂੰ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਕਿ ਪੰਥ ਆਪਣੇ ਫੈਸਲੇ ਟਾਈਮ ਦੇ ਅਕੋਰਡਿੰਗ ਲੈ ਸਕਦਾ. So but then that's where ਜਿਹੜੀ water, when we say the water that stagnates starts smelling, and that's what's happened because we haven't changed our system for so long, and that is where the problem has occurred. We need radical changes to the existing system, but then again, any change within their system, which is like a subsidiary of their system, is never going to give any justice, is never going to deliver any justice to the Qawm. So we will have to now start planning, our system to come out of their system, which is just a replica of the British system. I mean, I think we've reached...
ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਨਜਾਇਜ਼ ਉਪਜ ਆ ਸਿੱਧੇ ਲਫ਼ਜ਼ਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ. It's like the illegitimate child. That's what the Indian state is. There's a really good book here. It's a fiction book. If anyone wants to understand this, it's called Devil on the Cross by African writer Ngugi. And he writes this like story about, these people living in a space. And he gives like this critique of, the Angrej, they leave through the front door and then they enter through the back door, and how they create like this confusion and this confusing mess that you think it can save you, but it can't save you. And like Shahid Bhai Jaswant Singh Khalra in an article that he writes, because Jaswant Singh Khalra has almost been turned into like this Martin Luther King type human rights figure, but he was very, very radical in his politics as well, and he wrote a lot, fortunately for us, so we can actually learn what his positions were. And he says, like, how can, jira madan dushman ne banaya tanu qaid karan waste, us madan, how can that field, that space that was created by your enemy to imprison you, how can that ever serve you? How can it liberate you? And he's like, our struggle isn't for the price of what rice is selling for. Our struggle isn't that we can swear a false oath to the Indian constitution and then tomorrow we can, chutti song, like Punjabi de vich, right? Like he says, I see chutti song is chak sakde, because in order to participate in the Indian system, you got to swear an oath to the Indian constitution that you'll uphold it and you won't challenge the integrity of India. How can you swear a false oath and then do something against that oath that, like that is chankya niti. That's not our way of doing things. And then he also gives other examples of during the 60s when like there were Sikhs that were had much more influence in Punjab's legislature, and he's like, what happened then? Like ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਕੀ ਸਿੱਟੇ ਨਿਕਲੇ? Like what examples can we pull from that time? And the thing is, we've seen all of this, like Sardar Hakam Singh and Master Tara Singh in 1947 when they refuse, because this is technically the Sikh position, the Panthic position, if there is a Panthic position on the Indian state, if we were to name a position, and that would be Master Tara Singh and Sardar Hakam Singh refusing to sign the Indian constitution. So technically, we haven't agreed to being part of India in 1947 when it's created, because what Sardar Hakam Singh and Master Tara Singh says, Sardar Hakam Singh says that there's enough provision in this constitution for the country to go towards fascism, and Tara Singh says that the Angrej has gone, but our sovereignty has not come, and we've just changed masters, white for black, and referring to like the Indians, and because the constitution subordinates Sikhs as this citizen entity underneath the sovereignty of the Indian state. So even then, at that time, and Master Tara Singh has been presented as this like massive traitor of like the Panth and stuff, possibly unfairly so. even then that position was seen as not a Sikh position, that we can't accept a position where another entity has sovereignty over us. But today the starting point is we are the loyal, faithful citizen. And Santji's politics, the politics of everyone that came before him and all the Jujarus that came after him, their politics was outside of the daira, the outside of the confines, the box, the legal boundary, because that the box is a legal line that if you cross it, then we have the right to arrest you, to mutilate your body, to torture you, to kill you or whatever. So when we talk about extrajudicial murder, that like kind of gives a space that there is a judicial murder, which is that it should be done judicially, which is sentence you to death or hanging, right? Because we say Kanal Kita from Kartar Singh Sarabha, and even before that, like Narankari reform movement, ਉੱਥੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਤੋਪਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਬੰਨ ਕੇ ਅੰਗਰੇਜ਼ਾਂ ਨੇ ਉਡਾਇਆ. You may have seen like the paintings, right? We see them in the Gurdwara. They were tied to cannons and blown apart as a punishment. And violent death or death as a punishment has been part of the agreement with the state. So where like today like there's the death penalty, like Jaggi could potentially face it if he's found guilty. That is within the confines of the state. But Sant Janel Singh and all the rest of it being outside of that, they're embracing a different type of death. Maran mansa surya haq hai. Like surme da haq hai कि ਅਸੀਂ ਮਰਨਾ ਹੈ, ਅਸੀਂ ਜੂਝ ਕੇ ਸ਼ਹਾਦਤ ਪਾਉਣੀ, ਜੇ ਹੋਏ ਮਰਨ ਪਰਵਾਨੋ, ਜੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਨੂੰ ਪਾਉਂਦਾ ਹੈ, ਜੇ ਪਰਵਾਨ ਹੈ. It's not that they're afraid of death, it's that they want to live and die on their own terms, completely sovereign. ਕਿ ਉਹ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਮਰਨੀ ਜਾਂ ਤਤੀ ਤਵੀ ਹੋਵੇ, like whether it's the brutal death, they don't fear it. Like ਚਰਖੜੀ ਤੇ ਚੜਨਾ ਜਾਂ ਬੰਦ ਕਟਾਉਣਾ, ਉਹਦਾ ਡਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ. The ਡਰ is ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਅਧੀਨਗੀ ਨਾ ਕਬੂਲ ਲਈਏ. The ਡਰ is like let's not die in a way that ਉੱਤੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਦੀ ਖੁਸ਼ੀ ਨਾ ਆਵੇ. Like Sant Ji famously says, ਮੈਂ ਸੋਫੇ ਸੈੱਟ ਤੇ ਬੈਠ ਕੇ ਮਰਨਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ. Like ਇੱਦਾਂ ਦੀ ਮੌਤ ਹੋਵੇ, like ਰਨ ਭੂਮੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ.
Just I feel like now we're coming towards 1947, but just to give context to the Sangha, just thinking about, there's a lot of different organizations and groups that have been named here, and there's going to be more being named later on. And I feel like sometimes people get a bit confused, especially when you get into towards 84 and there's going to be all these different groups being named. So if we can just give some context to that first, please, that'd be great. So like, just in a nutshell, please don't spend too much time on it. SGPC, Akali Dal, and then this is I think the All Muslim League group, these different players when it comes to 47. Can somebody just define what is SGPC, what is Akali Dal, and who are these other groups, and then bring it into 1947?
I think SGPC, as the name stands for, is Shromani Gurdwara Prabandhak Committee, which was given a task to manage Gurdwaras, manage the Khajana, manage the repairs, manage the Sikhi Prachar. I mean, there was a Dharam Prachar Committee in SGPC, which was actually their task was to do Sikhi Prachar, like little kitab che, booklets, distribute pamphlets about Sikhi and doing some, Prachar, Katha, seminars and everything. That was Dharam Prachar Committee. But then Akali Dal was a bit more political version of taking the Sikh interests further in public. They were not participating in elections at that time until 47, and I think they were kind of like the Congress version, the Sikh version of Congress, if you like to put it that way. But then the Sikhi at that time in itself, like our leadership was quite fragmented in terms of there was Taksal obviously at that time with they were kind of doing their own prachar lays. There were a lot of as Paisa mentioned Udasis vi sige, Nirmale vi sige, bahut sare ਹੋਰ versions sige ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਿ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਦਾ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਸਨ ਪ੍ਰਚਾਰ. But Akali Dal was mainly liaising with government on Sikh issues, not essentially participating in elections, but then they were liaising with the government for Sikh issues.
And then how does that link now to 1947?
So, 47 is a bit of a turnaround point for everything, I guess. First thing I think that came out of it was Punjab got split in do hisse, and our nationalism got heavily destroyed. Maharaj Ranjit Singh actually was very successful in doing one thing, was to actually put Punjab nationalism on the table regardless of what religion you come from. Even the Mussalman used to, even now when I went to Nankana Sahib, They were saying, you know, when you guys used to rule this land used to be perfect. You know, even they are saying that, because Maharaja Ranjit Singh had that kind of impact on people. In 47, as I said, Redcliffe Line was very sort of, it was not marked properly, just to create confusions, just to create a bloodbath primarily between Sikh and the Muslim community.
Was that deliberate? Because what I've heard, not to say it's true, is that Radcliffe, he didn't like India, he just wanted to get out of India, or was it done deliberately, like just put the line through?
You know, there's often you hear that story, right? Like Radcliffe was hastily, brought in. He didn't have any experience, and he drew this line, and it was because of his inexperience that line was drawn in that way. But I think that's not right. I think that's a kind of a fabricated version of that story to remove the culpability of the colonial administration. Like, for nearly a century at this point, they were observing, studying, counting, documenting everything that they could about that area, because this was a big part of colonial administration, was record keeping, and they go on later to destroy records, which is another big part of them hiding their crimes, essentially. So I think Radcliffe's intervention was a strategic intervention to like Punjab is called the land of the five rivers, Nankana Sahib, and like so much of Sikh Ityas that's now on the other side of the border, that it wasn't that India and Pakistan were created. It was Punjab and Bengal were partitioned to create these places. So partitioning of Punjab was a strategic decision to split a geographical region in half. And now you've got one of the most militarized borders in the world, and you've got this lasting ethnic conflict between the Sikh and the Muslim, which also suits British administrators. At the fall of the Lahore Darbar, the last remaining loyal soldiers to the Lahore Darbar were the Muslim soldiers. And there's this whole narrative that's been spun of throwing in their lot with the Hindus because they were somehow less threatening to Sikhs than the Muslim as being the ancient enemy. Well, a lot of this discourse relies on these kind of stereotypical gallan baataan to kind of to pull you in a certain direction. Obviously it was like it was a massive mistake, for Sikh leadership at that time to side with the Indian state, thinking that their interests would be safeguarded. There's like some famous quotes from Indian politicians like Nehru, Gandhi, etc., saying, of course, Sikhs will be given their autonomy, and Punjab would be treated like any other state. So when the Indian state's created in 1947, there's this brief moment where British rule is reverted to the pre-colonial rule, and those independent sovereign territories are briefly alive again for a short period of time, but then it's completely replaced with the sovereignty of the Indian state. So all other kind of territories are organized on basis of like language and ethnicity, because this is something that the colonial administrators were keen on, like ethnic groups, like grouping you into these ethnic categories. But Punjab was denied any kind of semblance of a state, like compared to the other states. So it was denied, linguistic rights. It was denied rights to its water. It was denied rights to a state capital. Even today, Chandigarh is a shared capital. And then Punjab from 1947 was further then divided, where Himachal and Haryana were taken out under the Punjab Reorganization Act. So again, I was mentioning earlier, like these partition, the Akali Dal, all the rest of it, they become, the problem with them is you fall underneath this legal infrastructure. So where like the the Akali Dal emerges as a Panthic political platform, experiment, a project to express Sikh sovereignty and autonomy, and it starts off with that idea, and then to where it is today is completely like unrecognizable. And its downfall is when they start engaging with the Indian system as part of the Indian system, and they stop engaging as an independent entity, and they have no politics of their own. Their politics become the politics of like the Indian state. The Azad Hond Hasti, the being, the existence of the Panth is replaced with politics of Subedari, politics of borrowed power, like having a Subedar literally is like a low-level administrative position. And that's where like the whole kind of mess comes in following 1947. So the Akali Dal today, like it can't be reformed because like those ideals that it set itself upon like don't exist anymore, like within that structure. And then obviously of like following that in the 1920s when it emerges to like when like Badal consolidates all of the power of the Akali Dal. So even with the Akali Dal, you had different power bases, and the way the Akali Dal was in like even 1984 is completely different to like where the Akali Dal is today. It just doesn't have those rivalries within the Akali Dal at that time. You had like more pro-something, more pro-Panthic factions, and you had more kind of pro-government factions. And then it slowly becomes this like Indian political party that exists under the Indian constitution. But today, funnily enough, with everything that's happening, Akali Dal still claims to represent Panthic interests. So you'll have people from politicians from the Akali Dal which is an Indian party now under the Indian electoral system, claiming to represent the Panth's interests, but they can't though, because it's just they're completely subordinate to that structure. And Indian commentators will talk about a Panthic candidate, like this candidate, like Vultoa, for example, standing in Khadur Sahib against Amritpal Singh. They'll say, oh, look, you've got two Panthic candidates, fighting for an election in this area. But those kind of terms are contradictory, because the Panth siyasat, as we've seen, exists outside of these like boundaries.
Yeah, I think, as Bhai Sahib has mentioned, I think another turning point was 1966. 47. I mean, Bhai Sahib just briefly mentioned Mahatma Gandhi actually came to Gurdwara Seesganj Sahib and said that you're gonna get your Azad Khitta, and a Sikh from the Sangat said, what if you disobey your promises? Then ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੇ ਕਿਰਪਾਨਾਂ ਤੇ ਪਾਈਆਂ ਹੀ ਹੋਈਆਂ ਨੇ, ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿੱਥੇ ਜਾਵਾਂਗੇ? That is what he exactly said. So basically, what they promised was a union of states. There were like 530 princely states joining the Union of India. And I remember this from a book when actually Muhammad Ali Jinnah said to Master Tara Singh, said, I think you guys are doing the biggest mistake going with India, because you have seen these people Ghulam. When they get the Raj, the atrocities they will do to you, you'll forget Mughals. This is what he said. And to be honest, that's what exactly happened. So in 47, they basically organized India into, I think, 23 states at that time. And then Punjab was actually nearly triple the size than what it is right now. But as Paisa said, the Punjab was not divided on linguistic base. Now, there are two aspects to it. Like Gujarat got their state with their mother tongue as Gujarati. Maharashtra was Marathi. Basically, in 47, as Paisa mentioned, the one happened with Bengal. So Bangladesh became East Pakistan at that time. And Punjab was split into two, one with India, one with Pakistan. Now, Punjab is still the biggest state in Pakistan, by the way. The 80% of their army comes from Punjab, and 60-70% of the leaders, they come from Punjab as well. 30-40% of bureaucracy, because bureaucracy is more Karachi and Islamabad, but that's just talking about their side of Punjab. So in effect, what they did was, they didn't wanted another strong nationalism next to these two nations, Pakistan and India, because it's a product of decolonization, and it was a product of Britishers, because they knew how to control it. Obviously, Pakistan lost Bangladesh after the Mukti Wahini did whatever. I think that's a separate topic. We won't touch that. We just stick to our topic, which is they split Punjab, but not on a linguistic basis. Now, what happened there was, it was a much bigger Punjab, but Sikhs were not in the majority of that state. So you will never see a Sikh CM. You will never see a Sikh political party winning. And that's why Akali Dal and all the Panthak forces, they started a morcha called Punjabi Subha Morcha. The idea of that was that give us the rights, give us our own capital. And there was a tiny bit which was like an interstate within Punjab, which was Pepsu, which was basically the Patiala kingdom. The product of that is Captain Amrinder Singh now. So that was kept separate from the other greater Punjab at that time. Now, when we started this agitation, now what happened? 1955, they raided Darbar Sahib, Indian Army.
Okay.
Because Jede bhi Punjabi Suba Morcha all used to go from the Morche, they used to get Jatheband from Akal Takht and used to give Giriftariyan and used to go for the Morche. So they raided Akal Takht Sahib and Darbar Sahib in 1955. Now, after taking the advantage, now they are very intelligent, as I said, they create a problem and then they solve it and resolve it at their accord, not for your benefit. So what they said was, okay, you guys need Punjabi Suba Morcha, we'll give you that. So there was a campaign of kind of like a referendum going on. Ki, all the citizens will be asked, what is your language? What do you recognize as your language? And there was a big campaign by Lala Jagat Narayan, because that was the only press institution called Jagbani and Punjab Kesari that was actually relevant at that time. So he started giving interviews, he started running campaigns in his paper that all the Hindus should actually say that their language is Hindi, not Punjabi. So as a result, there is this very funny clip that was played on the All India radio. A Hindu was being asked, what is your language? And he said, Sadi language Hindi hai. Sadi pasha Hindi hai. He's speaking Punjabi, but he's saying Sadi pasha Hindi hai. As an effect, what happened was a lot of ilake of Himachal Pradesh, which is now Himachal Pradesh, all of that went to a separate state called Himachal Pradesh. A lot of Punjabi-speaking ilake went to Haryana and Rajasthan cause of this false referendum. And we were struck with a very, in Punjabi language, you say it's a subi. It's not a suba. It's such a small state, right, geographically, with a shared capital of Chandigarh between Haryana and Punjab. We don't even have a capital. Can you imagine UK without London or India without Delhi? You don't have, it's a union territory. Now, a union territory is directly controlled by the central government. So you don't have any say in your in your financial capital, which was Chandigarh. The another notorious thing they did in 1966, along with reorganizing Punjab, was a dam board came into being, which is called Pakada Nangal Dam Board. Now, what they did was, very strategically, they stopped all your water resources, because the water is coming from above the mountains, going into Punjab. So according to the riparian international law, again, Shamsher is not going to like this term. I'm talking about international law. But even from a human right perspective, any water that naturally flows into your area, it belongs to that state. You can't stop it midway and divert it. But that's what Indian state did. They created a Pakra Nangal Dam. 80% of the water. Now, nowadays we talk about SYL. SYL is just a tip of the iceberg. It's just like deviating maybe the 20% water that is left now to Yamuna, basically diverting your Satluj Pani to Yamuna, Satluj Yamuna link Nair. That's what SYL is. But what we need to go back and see is, even at the time of the Gore's administration, there was only one Nair going from Punjab, which was called Bikaner Nair. And you were getting monetary compensation for the pani that was going to Rajasthan from that Bikaner Nair. After Punjab got reorganized, there are hundreds of Nairs going out of Punjab. And the biggest thing is this Pakra Nangal Dam, where they've stopped your water, 80% of your water, and that's going into different states. Along with that, what they started doing was they started nurturing these little sects, Nirankaris, Kukes, and all of these different, even, what do you call it? The Radha Swamis, yeah? So what they did was, just talking about Nirankaris, yeah?
Sorry, Paji. Just to step in there just for a second. Talking about the Punjabi Subha movement, after the partition, other states get formed on linguistic grounds, as Pai Sahib was mentioning, and without any kind of agitation, without any need. And what Sikhs had started to realize, that this massive blunder going with the Indians, and obviously forfeiting our kind of Padshai, our sovereignty, to another power, was that the Indians were terrified of us having any sort of power. So although all the other states had been formed naturally just on linguistic grounds, when we realized that those promises that were made by the Congress were being broken, and that the constitution wasn't going to be written based on what the Sikhs what the Sikhs wanted, there wasn't going to be an area in the north where we were going to experience a glow of freedom that they had said in their pledges. That's when the Sikh leaders and the Akalis, Bhai Ajmer Singh describes their politics and Sanchi's politics in a really interesting way for someone like a layman like myself. He said that the problem with the Akalis it's like being in a train that was heading to Delhi, and they were inside the train running towards Punjab. So they're trying to go towards Punjab, but the train is going towards Delhi. But Sanchi was outside of this system. So the problem we see with this kind of political system is that they were obviously partitions happened, which wasn't meant to happen. We've lost half our lands, which had 80% of the fertile lands. Most of our historical sites are left in Pakistan. And so we're struggling. We're literally hand over fist. We're losing like language now, and now Punjab as a state doesn't exist. So that's why, in terms of desperation, we were like, what can we do now? And the Sikh political leaders at the time went to, I think it was Ambedkar, right? Who said like, you lot of, the ship has sailed, and you've kind of signed over to everything. So the only thing you can do now is an agitation based on linguistic grounds. And even a state based on linguistic grounds, the government was so terrified of us having like what would have been that Punjab at the moment, was that they, like in their rights in the memoirs, that her dad, like Nehru, they were completely against it. And they had actually got, I think it was Hukam Chand, he was like a Sikh, I think it was the Speaker of Parliament, and he was the head of the commission party I was talking about with the language, and they wanted him to deliver this report, which was going to suggest against the Punjabi Suba. And he actually said this in his writings, that they wanted to use me as a Sikh to go against my community. But he basically wrote what should have happened. They should be based on like the wider linguistic ground, like in Haryana, all those areas that were left to Delhi and Rajasthan as well. So even them granting the Punjabi state based on linguistic grounds on what it is now, the truncated Punjab, that was after 60,000 Sikhs had court arrest. So more people, not just Sikhs, but more people went to jail during the Punjabi Suba than the entire the Indian independence movement. So having liberated India, we're now having to do even more sacrifices just to preserve like the language. Punjabi, think about the significance of it, that Punjabi wouldn't have been the language of that area today. And then even when they do grant the Punjabi Suba or the Subi, that's after the 65 war. So because the Punjab, like obviously defeated Pakistan essentially, because whenever India and Pakistan have a war, it's really Punjab versus Pakistan. Because we defeated Pakistan and because of the valor of the Sikhs in the area, etc., the public opinion for the Sikhs was so high that they couldn't not. And this obviously the galti of the Sikh leaders at the time, the Akalis, that they then agreed to a massively truncated, a massively smaller area. And as Paisa was describing, that all the river water, diversion of the river waters, the control of the river waters that was in Delhi, the control of Chandigarh, the control of all those areas, that all comes under that Punjabi state. So they were like, if you're going to get something, then it's going to be like this smaller, then you're not going to have the river waters, you're not going to have this. So all of those things are part of that deal.
And you think is it the conversation post 1947 for me becomes messy, because before 1947, like 1849 to 1947, that 100-year period, it was a struggle against the colonizer, the Farangi, imposing their systems, their rules. We were fighting multiple battles, wars, and the nishana was always liberation, azadi, like our sovereign hond hasti, Pant aval, the Pant institution should be cam, and we should be able to exist and function autonomously. Following 1947, the conversation then becomes very simply, becomes muddying the waters. It becomes the whole thing about liberation and sovereignty turns into a conversation of rights and justice. And then it becomes about linguistic rights and river water rights and agricultural rights and rights to national capital, rights to like defining the borders, rights to defining like how we govern SGPC, etc. And that like reduces the struggle and confines the struggle. And then you see later on in 1984 how Sant Janel Singh completely reorientates this whole dynamic that had been existing from 47 pretty much, and flips it on its head, and he demonstrates practically what the limitations are. But I'll give you one example of how the post 47 conversation muddies the water, and where it actually originates is when the Farangi encountered the Akali Khalsa, they couldn't they couldn't tolerate having this Akali unruly anarchist like group that was outside of their control. So they had to institute ways of like limiting and controlling them and replacing their Panthak Jugat, Panthak techniques and methods with bureaucratic procedures and processes. And that's a big part of what we see later on. So in 1925, what the Gurdwara Act formalizes is before 1925 you had Akali Jathe, and the Akali Jathe, whoever was the leader of the Akali Jatha, who was selected according to Panthic traditions, would then become the Jathedar of the Jatha, and that Jathedar would be the Jathedar of Akaal, Takhat Sahib. And traditionally this was Buddha Dal, and this is and his Panch Pradhani leadership, and it was based on Gurmat principles. And what ends up happening is to shift the governance of the Takhat Sahib to the hands of the Angrez. What they did is they brought a Sarbara, which is essentially an overseer, a Sikh in a position, a bureaucratic position above the Akaal Takhat. And this bureaucratic position now governs everything else underneath. And through the Gurdwara Act, the Sarbara becomes part of the law, and that Sarbara then turns into the Jathedar of Akaal Takhat, which is underneath the Indian electoral system and the government, which we see today. So when we talk about the Akaal Takhat Jathedar today, we're talking about an individual that falls underneath the Gurdwaras Act and the remit of the SGPC, the Shromani Gurdwara Prabandhik Committee, which is a body constituted by provisions in the Indian Constitution and Indian law, and their power is limited to what it says in those laws and in those what they're allowed essentially. So this is your remit now. So you've gone from Akali Jathe to a bureaucratic process. And there's been continuous struggle against this, particularly between 1922 and 1925. There was Jaddojet struggle to remove this kind of system, but now we're in that position now where that the whole structure and that decision making process is inherently compromised, and it can't be reformed. It has to, in 1986, what the Sikhs did is they made a decision as part of the Gurmat, as part of the Sarbat Khalsa, to abolish the SGPC, and it's a very radical step. And today, I think the significance of that is kind of lost, and because we're so caught up in that this possibility of being able to reform the system or change those individuals or change the system, that if the SGPC functioned correctly, then it could fulfill the Sikh desires. But it can't, because this is just the way it engages.
And in the same way as the SGPC Act of 1925, the Punjab Reorganisation Act again is an act of Parliament. So all of those provisions that they've made, that's harrowing for Punjab's future. We can't ever have any kind of change in that, because again we'd need a majority in the Indian Parliament.
It's the same laws that allowed the bounty system, which the Farangis had, where they would put prices on the heads of Akalis and they would literally hunt them and give hunting license. The Indian state uses its laws to institute bounty systems where they're giving cash prizes for you hunting Sikhs and their families. And it's the same laws that allow them to have these special courts and special processes, allow torture, allow confession extracted by police. So on one hand, that system law is working in its naked form to physically mutilate you and destroy you. How do you think that the kind of version of that can serve you? It's a slower death, and it's the clarity of the police officers shooting bullets at you is it reveals the nature of the state a lot more, and that's what we get to in 84, where the provocation of the Sikhs forces the Indian state to benaqab karda hai. It makes them reveal the true nature of the Indian state's power is authoritarian. If you challenge its sovereignty, then you'll be destroyed. You can happily kind of advocate for rights of river water and the price of chawl. You can carry on doing it. Even today, Kasani Sangharsh, it's fighting over the same things that agricultural bills and reform conversations were fighting decades ago. There's been no progress in that movement because that movement has no vision. And even now, the success of the repeal of the farm laws takes you back to the crisis point anyway, because Punjab's agriculture is already at a crisis point because its biodiversity is being finished. Cash crops are introduced like chonna, like rice and wheat. Rice is not indigenous to Punjab. It's draining the water. It's draining the the bijli. Everything is it's a massively negative impact. So by repealing the laws, you're going back to the status quo. That system never served you.
I think that was the next thing we were about to touch, because we're talking about 66. There are three main things happening at that time. One is the Derawad. Second is the Green Revolution, which Paji just touched upon. Now, Green Revolution is basically when India and Pakistan became two separate entities. the most fertile land was left in Pakistan. So India was heavily food deficit. And Punjab was the only kind of fertile land where they could have grown their crops. Now, for example, rice is not our food, but we were forced to grow that food because they were offering an MSP on this. Now, there will be a lot of back and forth when we talk about MSP. Now, we're again on the streets talking about MSP. Now, they actually encouraged you to grow certain kind of crops, which was suitable for them, which is cotton, kapah, which we say, jute. Our food was entirely different. Like our staple food is makki di roti and not kanak di roti, if you know what I mean. We used to have different kind of rotis at that time. So basically, they encouraged us to grow this using a lot of fertilizer, using a lot of pesticides, and growing rice, which requires clayey soil. Okay. Otherwise, what's going to happen is it's going to drain your pani out of your water table. Now, that is what we are encountering now. When NASA says, 3 of your cities are going to run out of groundwater. And that's the impact after the Green Revolution. I like to call it greed revolution. So what they did was they encouraged you to grow some crops for money. And what happened was there was another thing that happened alongside that. Due to Green Revolution, your production, your yield increased manifold. So banks started giving you loans, a lot more loans, obviously in return of your papers for your property. And that's what's happening right now. All the small and the marginalized farmers, they are basically, this is what they're faring. That's why they're on the street every year saying ki sade karje maaf karo nahi to sadi zameen chal jani. But that's what the Green Revolution did. And on another side, in 1968, Sardar Kapoor Singh, who was basically the next presidential candidate, if you like me to say, he was a civil servant, very higher up in India, and he was one of the next presidential candidate from Congress. He had a circular come from the central government to, I think, to the DC of Amritsar or something, that Sikhs are jaraim pesha qaum, they're criminal-minded qaum. So he basically went all out and said this all out loud, that this is how, we've given so much qurbani for this so-called Azadi, and that's what they label you as, a criminal community. So he went all out, he was a whistleblower, he was penalized, he was retired from his civil service without pension and everything. So he became another powerful figure in Sikh politics who actually devised the Anandpur Mata, which laid foundation for the Dharam Yudh Morcha. I don't want to go beyond that because we want to discuss 78, but just to give you a reference about 78, all these Nirankaris, Radha Swami and all these Deres, at that time there was no 58 channels or 200 odd channels. There was only one channel, which was Doordarshan, and there was a radio channel called All India Radio. Nirankari's events were being publicized on that public channel, which is called Doordarshan. Basically, unnu sone ch tol de paye si, and he had jameens all over Delhi just to apne dere vadaan vaste. So he was giving proper share, What he did in Delhi was he actually paralleled Panj Pyare with Sat Sitare, and he basically had his own Nagar Kirtan within Delhi, right? And with Guru Granth Sahib Ji in a very respectable position in that Nagar Kirtan. So he was actually standing higher up than Guru Sahib in that Jalus. So a lot happened, and he was basically explicitly saying some blasphemous things about Guru Sahib on All India Radio and on Doordarshan. And that's what then eventually led to the turning point, I would say, of the current Sikh dispute with India, 1978, when the Indian government clearly backed a sect versus a whole community versus a whole Punjab. So that just gives you a bit of a background into 78 and 84. That's what, there was a lot of things happening. After we move from 78, I'll even give you a bit of a bit of an insight into what BJP was doing at that time. What they did in 80s in Punjab. They were basically having jalus with cigarettes on the dande, saying, "Bidi piyenge shaan se, neeli pili rehn nahi deni, sat sri akal kehn nahi deni, kach kada kirpan, ennu bhejo Pakistan." These were the nare well within the boundary of Amritsar, which is called Guru the Nagari, and Harbans Lal Khanna. And that's not the only thing they did. They dismantled the model of Darbar Sahib on the Amritsar railway station. And there was obviously we don't believe in Guru Sahib's pictures, but there was a Guru Ramdas Sahib picture there. And they dismantled it. So that's, I'm talking about Punjab, I'm talking about Amritsar. So that was the whole environment at that time. But yes, I think we'll talk about 78 in further detail, because that was, as I said, another turning point into the recent conflict.
And like Baji says, understanding post 47 is the transfer of power from all of the power that the Farangi had been getting into their hands is now transferred into a ruling elite, the Brahmin ruling elite of India. And everything that you see, like the division of Punjab, reducing its status, attacking it in every different way, to ultimately that the naked attack, which is directly attacking Sikhi and fueling these cults, and giving them government protection, it's all a manifesting of their power. That, and that conflict's been building since Guru Nanak Pasha refused to wear the janneo and spoke against Brahmanism, challenged Brahmanism and what it is, like Sharyam, Dunya nu dikhata, like this is what the reality of Brahmanism is, and that conflict has been building for a very, very long time, and you see it come to a head in the 80s.
And also, when Paji spoke about the transfer of power, it's very evident. I'll tell you one snippet of history from B.R. Ambedkar. Now, B.R. Ambedkar is the one who actually designed the Indian Constitution. That was in the 1950s, basically. 47, they got independence. 50, they made up the Constitution, which no Sikh was ready to sign. In 53, he's standing in the parliament and he said, allow me to burn this Constitution. Do you know why? Because he said, I was very haphazardly forced to make this Constitution, which is 80% a copy of the Government of India Act 1935, which Gore used to suppress Indians. So now he said, I think this Constitution is only gonna, basically exploit minorities and kat ginti bande and the poor. So he said this Constitution is actually no good for anyone. It's just a replica copy of what Gore used on us. So that's why we're saying transfer of power. And as Paji mentioned earlier, they had acts like POTA, they had acts like TADA, they had acts like UAPA, they had Criminal Prevention Activity Act, whatever. All these acts were the replica copy of what Gore used to use against us, even worse actually. Some of the acts are even worse, like with TADA, POTA and UAPA. You can interrogate somebody for months without charge sheet because it comes under the ambit of terrorism, So you can actually just pick up anybody. You can pick up any relative. You can basically just torture them to seek information. So that just gives state a tool to use you and label you as a terrorist without any court decision, without anything. And they can do whatever they want.
And like the Armed Forces Special Power Act, it gave power to the military to essentially act as all branches of the government, which was the police, the judiciary, everything, the civil service. They could make decisions effectively. But all of that shows you what the law is in practice, what the reality of the law is in practice when it's used against you in that form. There's another point I wanted to make about this idea of Indianness and the word Indian, because before 1947 it's not used by us, and arguably Sikhs don't use that word as he said. So that's our Pashan, we're tied to the idea of the Panth, the Khalsa. So this idea of being like an Indian or being British or being Canadian, for me is a very alien thing. But in Indian in particular is really interesting because you hear Sikhs use that term. And it doesn't exist from any of the languages. It's not a word from Punjabi, it's a word from English. And the Angrez invented that word to refer to brown people, and they use that word in two places, one in North America, on that part of the world where they say these are the native Indians, or they use it in, this South Asia where they talk about brown people here, and they use it there because they thought they were going to India and they landed there, whatever, right? So, but that word and that idea of the Indian identity and the unitary, there's this one idea of what it means to be Indian, didn't exist before 1947. It's created following 1947, and that's where this whole idea of nationalism comes in, and how nationalism is used to create an identity and build a politics and build whole philosophy around it. And for me, the Khalistan struggle isn't the Sikh version of nationalism. Our struggle isn't for nationhood in that sense. Our struggle is for the Khalsa di Azad hond hasti ki sanu eho jiha thaan mile jithe sade bol balle kaim hon. We've got our own language to describe what our desh means to us, and it's not nationalism. Nationalism is a political phenomena that's tied to colonization and emerges in a very specific context. You can't understand nationalism without understanding colonization and capitalism, etc. Because nation de vich there's a type of citizen that's valuable, and that is the productive citizen. And in there, the disabled citizen, the migrant, they have no value. Oda koi hak nahi, like, look at where disability rights are in the UK, or the recent Prime Minister talking about sick people and etc. like or the criminal, or the person that deforms nationalism, because if there's a nationalism, there's an anti-national, and in the Indian national equation we're the anti-national, right? So and that's why they use language like operation, like occupation, like like kind of almost like clinical, flushing the extremists. They use like clinical terminology almost, because it shows you what's underlying their philosophy and their system isn't Nanak Raj Chalaya Sachkot Satani Neev de. What's underlying their system is capturing and maintaining power by any means necessary, and consolidating that and centralizing that. And what you see today in the form of Modi, like the power from Delhi, from where Vijay was talking about, like the union of states, that's all been centralized in Delhi. Like if you want to do a planning application in Punjab, that goes to Delhi, and then it comes back down to Punjab, and that process could take years. It's not like here it's the UK, the government here isn't like centralized. Compared to India. India is massively centralized, and that's a problem, because it concentrates, it leads to authoritarianism and fascism, etc. जो सिक्खा ने बहुत समय पहला किया सीगा कि इंडिया ने is going to become a fascivad nation. So our like politics, our position, our understanding of India, because we are older than India, is much more deeper and broader. So like that conversation following 47. It is limiting, because our struggle isn't for greater rights and justice, and we'll come to that.
Well, I think we've definitely given a lot of context to 47, and a nice way to bridge it towards 78 as well. So I think we should call it an end to this podcast. Any final comments from anyone? Chalo, that's great. Thank you so much. Thank you to all the Sangat as well. Please make sure that you leave any questions in the comment section as well. Leave your comments and let us know what you want to see going forward as well, especially after this series is finished, and good kid. But when it comes to November, things that we can cover. Then thank you to all the Gurmukhs here today for sharing all their knowledge and their experiences, and we look forward to seeing you guys in part 2. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.